Being 7:15 on the 25th of June, I'm going to start the ZBA meeting off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20F, this meeting is being recorded. This hearing is continuation of Westport Lake Road, hearing on application of Pine Ridge Estates LLC and Bradford Dean for a comprehensive permit pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40B, for a development off Westport Lakes Drive, consisting of 38 single-family houses on individual lots, which are to contain 2 or 3 bedrooms, with 10 of those homes being designated as affordable, deed-restricted homes. Subject property is located at 0 Westport Lakes Road and is shown on Assessor's Map 31, lots 3B, 3C, and 4G. So I'll have, okay, our petitioner. So we're going to start off, I'm going to start off with sort of a summary. We had a working group meeting a few weeks ago. Representatives, I was from the zoning board, we have representatives from the health department, we had our consultant, we had Concom, and the petitioner. And the whole idea was to go through all of the waivers, there's like 30 pages of waivers, to identify essentially what the hot spots were, and essentially to go through the list to see which were. A lot of them are managerial. A lot of it is paperwork oriented because a lot of these things are supposed to go through the planning board, and in a 40B they don't go through the planning board. So there's a lot of waivers that are in that realm. And I had our attorney, George Pucci, go through it first to identify those that are administrative mostly. And then the committee went through line by line and identified ones that none of the boards had any issues with. We identified some that had issues, but but could be managed with a condition on the if it was granted. There were maybe 3 or 4 of those that were again fairly minor. We still ended up with the 2 main issues that had to do with stormwater management and the percolation testing. Well, what was decided that time was that the health department was going to hold a meeting to review those 2 really sticky points to identify exactly how severe those restrictions are and if relief could be given or not, essentially how we would handle those 2 issues. So what I'm going to do, and if it's okay with the board, I'm going to skip over all the ones that our attorney said he will take care of. I'm going to skip over all the waivers that no department had any issues with. I mean, if none of our departments have an issue with it, I don't see why we would. So I'm only going to identify those paragraphs in which we had some comments about. And then, of course, the board, you can all have a comment on that. By the way, voting tonight will be Jerry Coutinho, Ray Elias, myself, Roger Menard, Constance Ski, and Cynthia Kazekowicz. So, having said that, for those who have 30 or 40 pages of the, not the latest, but okay. Make sure I have the right version. Gotta make sure I have all my handwriting here. Nope, wrong version. That's the one. Okay. So, I'm going to skip like several pages. And I'll tell you what the section is for the first major comment. A lot of the first ones all are paperwork specific.
Roger.
Section-
While we're all, I want to be sure we're all on the same page. What's your last revision date on
Okay.
See, it says
May
last-
5, May 5, 2025.
I got June 18.
You have, that's that one that just came in this past week.
Yeah.
So that one already has some of the inputs put into it. I'm working on the ones that so you can still follow along.
We
It's the
follow
same-
you with
It's the
this?
same, it's the same numbers. Okay. Section 3B, 3H. The only comment we had on that is that the final plan has to depict the entire division, Form A plan, and that could be added as a condition for acceptance, although I talked to our attorney, and he would prefer to keep all of the comments, all of that information in the waiver itself, so that we don't have two places that are potentially conflicting. So so we would essentially put in this request for a waiver, something to the effect that the final plan shall depict the entire subdivision. Okay, the same goes for section 3B, 3M. Again, this is a little bit of paperwork, but it's nothing,
M or N? M.
M. N. 3B, 3N. Whoops, no, N. M, right.
Page 8?
Okay, section 4A, 11, design standard streets. We just made a note to provide standard turn radius. This has had to do with emergency vehicles. Section 4A, 3B, and I think this is already in the latest, if you look at 4A, 3B. This has to do with the grading of the roads, and that no greater than 2.5% in some, and no greater than 5%. What we also require, though, is that there's a minimum grade, so that you have water runoff. So we put a note to add a 1% minimum grade to all the roads in order to, so that there's always water runoff. Okay, we just made a note to section 5B1, the zoning board, so as a condition for approval, the zoning board to provide for brush tree clearing requirements within the roadway and the cul-de-sacs. I think this is best handled in the HOA section, but again, this is just a comment for that. I think we're coming up now to the... Okay, there are it comes in a couple of places. Section 5D2, and, okay, so, no, it's not. I'm going to jump all the way, oh, okay, 5D11, we just made a note that you have to revise to account to the property north, because it's included in the parcel that the petitioner owns. Okay, there was actually a new one that was added section 7.7. Originally, they had no setback waiver request. We actually advised them as to what the setback requirements are, and what they are requesting is that there's a 20-foot frontage rather than 25 feet, 10 feet from the side, which meets our requirement in the town, and 25 feet from the rear, but the town only requires 6 feet. So they're asking for relief from the front yardage, but providing significant more to the rear yardage setback. Okay, the next big one is section 7, the percolation standards. As you all probably know who were here for the last ones, that we had, I don't know, hours, it seems like, of discussion of the 30-minute versus 60-minute, complying with Title V versus, the 30-minute is a local requirement. And that is, well, anyway, I won't even get into basic. So we had discussed this as, like I said, amongst all of us, the Concom was here, the Health Department was here. And what it was decided was that the Health Department was going to go back and hold their own board meeting to essentially go through, to review the requirement for the 30-minute rate and identify, what the impact is and what the potential resolution could be. Attorney, did you get, Maria, have you been sending him the stuff from, okay, so you have the things from the Health Department?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Again, Christopher Agostino, counsel for the applicant. We received correspondence from the Health Department dated June 24th.
Right.
And then this afternoon, we actually received a follow-up letter dated June 25th.
Right.
So we did have a chance to look at both of them.
Okay. Now, in the June 24th one, they actually outlined essentially a process that they believe would be acceptable and appropriate, and that has to do with running a perk test on the site that you have to see if it meets the 30 minutes. If it doesn't, running a perk test on an alternate site to see if that doesn't meet 30 minutes. If neither of them do, then you pick the one that did the best.
Right, and we did review that letter dated the 24th with what we interpreted as proposed conditions to resolve the matter, and we thought these were largely appropriate. We thought it made a lot of sense. We think it should resolve the concern about trying to get to the best place possible, where the local regulation even provides for a waiver of that 30-minute in the discretion of the board. And really what's happening here is that this board is wearing that hat and ultimately will make the decision. And we thought the methodology was spot on. The one comment we had was that obviously, we're going to try to cite it where it's initially proposed. But we just, there was a sentence at the end of the first paragraph that said the number of tests shall be established by the board. Really, the only revision we would make to that is in accordance with Title V, because Title V does allow the board to ask for additional testing, but we just don't want to be in a situation where we're hunting all over. If we think that we've done our best, and certainly we want to be in a space where we get a great perk rate because it makes the system less expensive to build, and it's just, it makes sense for everybody. So we just didn't want to be in a situation where somehow, all of us have moved on. We're no longer the same volunteers on the Board of Health and the same volunteers on the zoning board, and someone else is interpreting that and says, sort of the, in the movie, again, situation. So as long as it's clear that it's in accordance with Title V as far as the number of tests, I think we discussed this language and looked over it, and I think it makes sense. It basically would solve the board's concern that we find the best site.
Okay,
You're reading the June 24th, not 25th, right?
Correct,
Yes.
and we did see the 25th letter this afternoon, and, you know, it, in the context of the June 24th letter, and I know there may be a Board of Health official here, but I think it just added some context to their reasoning, and obviously, a better perk rate is better for everyone. But the situation we're dealing with is, we designed the site because we believe there was an 8-minute perk rate that was valid, and it says it was witnessed, but, you know, there's no record of it with the Board of Health, and we have to do additional testing anyway. So we proposed to cite the SAS, the soil absorption system, based on that perk rate and can fit it right where it's shown. But if we're going to move forward with the project, we need to be able to have the flexibility to go elsewhere if it doesn't work out at that location. And frankly, the proposed conditions in lieu of, if the board sees fit to waive the 30-minute and the 100-foot setback, which are local, then we can comply with this essentially replacement condition.
Right, okay. So you have no issues with that, other than, I mean, all these things have to be wordsmithed.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, and it was just the number, like, how do we decide when is enough? You know, that we've done our best and that we can comply under the state, and we've done our best, and the board agrees we've done our best, and we have to comply under the state. That's a non-starter.
Yes.
And then that was our only comment there.
Okay, the next one is section 3, which is stormwater drainage. And again, this was brought to it, and we just have an input from Concom on the 24th of June, which I believe you probably have.
Yes, yep.
And essentially what it says is that the applicant agrees to conduct required stormwater management analysis designed to achieve the regulations recharge standards to the maximum extent practical. As part of the stormwater management plan, the developer also committed to install roof runoff dry wells to the maximum extent practical for each developed lot based on the specific site factors.
And again, I think this is, we read this letter, and our reaction was, this is the appropriate dialogue that should take place when you're talking about waiving local requirements that are more stringent than the state requirements. And what we had done following that meeting was, we proposed conditions, and, you know, we don't care where they end up, if they end up in the waiver list or in the permit, but what we did was, we proposed a condition that is the way we would see our final plan obligation to install roof drains, and what we introduced as a new concept, which is something that I've seen as a solution on sites where infiltration may be difficult, is rain gardens, which is referred to as a low-impact stormwater management infrastructure installation. And it's basically just swales in certain locations that will help with infiltrating to the maximum extent practicable. And so we proposed a condition that I could read for the board that is intended to say, look, we know we need to show under the state regs that we've tried our best to do infiltration of stormwater to the maximum extent we can. And so we're saying, to satisfy the local concern and tee this up for the Concom, because at first glance, the Concom's going to have the first look at compliance with the state regulations. They are sitting as a state regulatory agency. And they've already said, listen, we want to see some infiltration. So the idea is, this board approves or we ask this board to approve the most recent iteration of the plan set, which is the March 28th iteration, as the preliminary approved plans. And then the next step is, we go back and we have to get our Concom permit, and then see whether or not the final plans are consistent with the approved plans. And the permit conditions. And so the permit condition that we proposed is, the final plan shall provide for roof drains leading to underground infiltration basins, which shall be designed and installed to the maximum extent practicable. The final plan shall also take reasonable measures to maximize stormwater infiltration throughout the project's stormwater management system, again, to the maximum extent practicable, as may be required by the DEP Stormwater Management Handbook and Regulations. All gutter downspouts shall be directed to the project stormwater management system, including to roof drain infiltration basins and/or rain gardens and other so-called low-impact stormwater management structures as may be feasible. Nothing herein may be interpreted as a waiver or alteration of applicable state stormwater management standards as may be adjudicated by the Westport Conservation Commission and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. So as you indicated, all this needs to be reviewed and wordsmithed by the experts, MBL and the attorneys, but the idea is that, a waiver doesn't necessarily mean that the issue goes away. It means that we have the approved plans, and we know we need to do additional testing, but we don't know whether we have a project. So, that's the initial act here by the board is we're asking the board to approve the plans with certain parameters that we have to go back and then design for, one of them being this issue that is described in the Concom's letter. And it seems as though the Concom, and I don't know if they reviewed the language we proposed, but my takeaway was that the commission respectfully requests that the board consider incorporating the above commitments into the comprehensive permit, and that's what we've proposed to do.
Mr. Chairman,
Roger?
I have a question for you. The Concom used the term for the roof runoff as dry wells, and when you just read that, you used the term infiltration basin. Do you consider them the same thing?
We do.
I
It's
just think we should be consistent.
Oh, absolutely. And as I indicated, wordsmithing on these permits, I mean, I know we volunteered a draft, and sometimes the board and council for the board take it, rip it up, and throw it away. Other times, they use it as sort of a guide to identify issues that were discussed. But we've proposed that. What usually is installed, it's a system called Caltex, and basically, the easiest way to describe it is like an upside-down garbage barrel. It's a big plastic tank that is set in the ground upside down with holes in it. And it creates a void underground, and the drain leads to that, and then the water fills up in the void and infiltrates out. And we've committed, whatever we call it, we've committed to install those to the maximum extent we can.
And there's some stone in the bottom.
Right, exactly.
Attorney Pucci?
Yeah, first, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I apologize for taking my coat off. I am next to the air conditioner. It's still warm. Good to be with you tonight. George Pucci from KP Law. A couple of things I just wanted to know, just logistics-wise. On the waiver sheet, as you had indicated, Roger, I don't like to just be vague about the extent to which a waiver is granted if there's a limitation on it, but if you also don't need to reiterate everything, and if something is lengthy, I don't mind referencing conditions in the permit as long as the numbers of the conditions are referenced. The only thing you don't want to have to do is, what the building inspector doesn't want to have to do is look at the waiver list and then have to fumble through the decision, multiple pages looking for what the conditions are. So
Right.
as long as it references the paragraph number, I think that would work too. And I just wanted to note, because I know it's been provided to the board, the draft permit decision that council provided is perfectly legitimate. It
Okay.
looks a lot like one that I would provide to you if you had asked me to provide a initial, first draft of an approval with conditions. So he did it in the manner that I would typically do it, that you have categories and you have, it sort of serves as a checklist so that when you're looking at the final compliance issues, building inspector or whoever you have looking at it can kind of go through it, pre-site work conditions, final plan conditions, that type of thing. So there is a great degree of specifics provided in the draft permit, so you just want to make sure in the end that the board is comfortable with all the conditions that you want to see in this permit, and then we can work off of, I would recommend actually working off of the draft provided by council, because there's no sense in, taking some of the same paragraphs and putting them in a different number, so.
Okay.
I think I dug for a KP Law draft when I was
Yeah.
looking. So. But just to reiterate what was mentioned, we had a comment at the last hearing. I think you said, well, if we're waiving this, what's the requirement? And so we were able, in the waiver section, to say waive to allow for X, waive to allow for Y, and we spelled those out so that they're right there.
I did notice in your latest draft that you added a new waiver.
Yes, I believe that was the 100-foot.
Yes.
Right, and again, that was a byproduct of that eight-minute perk rate that we had outlined the basins with. And so the rectangle that you see on the plan for the soil absorption system is sized based on the perk rate and the gallons per day. And so the gallons per day are staying fixed because we're proposing, the 38 units, fixed, the number of bedrooms is fixed to result in that gallon per day flow. But the slower the perk rate, the bigger that box has to be. And we looked at it, and we sized it for 8 minutes, and it's actually set back to the 100 feet based on around that 8 minute. We stress tested the perk rate, and so what happens is, as the perk rate goes up, the box gets bigger. So we may still be able to put the boxes, that soil absorption system, at that location as shown on the plan. But if we're 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, we stress tested it up to 25 minutes. We believe we can fit it in within the state standard, which is a 50-foot setback. So to allow for that, we're asking for a waiver from the 100.
Now, see, this is something that we hadn't seen before, so that's something I'm gonna have to review.
Well, we brought it up, I believe we mentioned it in the overall context of, what we're trying to accomplish during the work session, and I thought the Board of Health had their eye on this issue. Certainly, the maximum extent practicable standard could apply to something like that. But if we find a good site and everybody agrees it's a good location that just happens to be, maybe 50 feet away at one location, the Title V and the State Wetlands Protection Act are deemed sufficient to protect the interest of the wetlands. And so unless there's something specific, we had added that to have some flexibility to get it into that site.
Tanya, you're here from, is that something that you guys look into?
I'm sorry? You want me to respond?
Yes, could you?
Sure.
Unless
Tanya Ryden, Chair of the Westport Board of Health. I will just acknowledge that Phil Weinberg has been the lead for the Board of Health in attending these meetings, and in the working group meeting, he was unable to attend tonight. I just do want to point out that as currently, they do not have a site for, a valid site for a septic system, for the soil absorption system, because the perk, he described stress testing the perk rate means redoing the perk, and the perk failed the state level standards as well as the local standards. So at this point, preliminary plan is not about, from a septic perspective, it doesn't give you a location that is going to work. I'm not sure where you go with that.
Well, all I'm asking, though, is Section 6, the septic system location requirements. We have a local requirement of 100 feet, while the Title V is 50 feet.
Right.
So, and what they're asking for is a waiver to allow 50 feet, assuming that everything else passes. What is the impact of approving this waiver for 50 feet versus 100 feet?
Okay. Let me, if I can spend just a couple minutes sort of backtracking why we have a local regulation that is stricter than Title V, which is explicitly permitted in Title V that local boards of health can establish stricter regulations based on local topography, local needs, and you can imagine that the state standard has to fit from Boston to Cuttyhunk, right? It has to be sort of, so it's a minimum standard. And particularly in rural communities like Westport that has essentially almost no sewer infrastructure and almost no public water supply. That means we have septic systems all around town and wells that in new construction have to be 100 feet away, but plenty are not, older ones. And we certainly see the impact of septic systems on well water quality. So the more you pack in and the more Westport develops, the more risk we have in terms of the fact that we don't have a public water supply and public sewer infrastructure. So that just sort of basic context of why we have a local regulation. And in particular, Westport has a lot of natural resources. We're not Boston, we're not urban, built up, and we want to protect those natural resources. We do have a lot of wetlands. We do have rivers and streams. We have coastal infrastructure. We have a lot of natural resources. And so the reason we have the 100-foot setback was set many boards ago, so I can't articulate specifically what they were arguing, but it was, I believe, as I've sort of generally outlined, we need and deserve greater protection in Westport because we have higher risk in terms of vulnerable natural resources, including wetlands, which, because we don't have sewer, is the sort of natural filtration body or resource area for cleaning water, especially storm water, but also septic effluent to some extent. And so you want to keep it, you don't want to stress that wetland. You want to keep, because it's, the stormwater is the primary function that it's going to clean. So you want to keep septic discharge further away so it is not stressing or burdening the wetland resource area. So that's what I'd say why we have local regulations. Specifically, I don't know if there were discussions about the 50-foot versus 100-foot setback. Obviously, when they originally proposed this plan using an old perk that we don't have on record, they didn't have to ask for a waiver. They wouldn't have had to ask for a waiver of the perk rate or the 100-foot. Now that they have a failed perk rate, they're trying to squeeze something in somewhere else on the project. You know, they want that flexibility. I don't think it's ideal, but you know, that's up to you to decide whether.
Can I just ask,
Sure.
the state, within the past few years, is mandating that we upgrade to the latest technology to do exactly what you're saying. And the reason we have the regulations that we have today is because of that. That's like, Westport was like ahead of the curve. And they pulled away from us and they said, well, keep doing what you're doing. And I just think that that's the reason that this is all flowing in that direction, our regulations. Anyway, I don't know about the 50 and 100 feet, but I do know that eventually the state's going to come and say, this is the way it has to be.
Right.
For new construction.
The revision to Title V that you're referring to applies primarily to Cape Cod. They have very sandy soils, very fast perk rates, and so that's where they targeted. They were originally proposing to include all of the South Coast communities, so as far as Westport, so all along Buzzards Bay. And it's a big change, and so they decided to phase it in, and so they started with the Cape. And that's, I think we made an argument to exclude Westport specifically because we had stricter local regulations to perform a similar function to what they were proposing for this revised Title V. So Ray is correct.
Was that primarily for denitrification, or was it?
Yep, that's the big one, D-Nite for new construction. And phasing out cesspools was the other big piece that we incorporated in our regulation.
So not necessarily dealing with the 50 and
Well, that was a local regulation that existed. I'd have to look it up exactly how long ago. The perk rate reg was put in place in 2004. I think there were that board 20 years ago was doing a lot of local regulations, so I'm suspecting that one happened around that time, but I don't know for sure. So it's been on the books for a long time.
Thank you. So what's the impact of meeting this or not meeting this?
If we don't have a waiver from the 100-foot setback and we get a favorable perk rate at the proposed location, which I just wanted to state, I'm unaware of any failed perk tests at those locations. The perk tests are on sheet 26 of 27, and when we went into this project, we were going off of test pits 101 and 102, as shown on the plan, that were performed on April 25th, 2006 by Len Potter, witnessed by James J. Walsh of the Westport Board of Health. But they have no record of those. So we're fine with that. We have to do additional testing anyway, not a problem. But we sized our site and we sized our SAS and cited it based on that. If that was an 8-minute perk rate, there was one that was 8-minute and the other was a 6-minute. If we don't hit those, it makes that box larger and it starts to creep into the 100 feet. And so there's nothing unique about that location that we would suggest would require a greater setback than 50 feet. You know, I'd note that we're not asking for a waiver of the denitrification local bylaw. So we are doing denitrification as part of the application. There's no waiver of that section. So we thought that we want to have it at that location, and just because it's a little bigger, we asked to comply with the state, which is 50.
I'm just looking at the original plan, right? So the original plan is to have it here, right next to the road,
Yes.
right? My concern is if you don't have your 100 feet between here and the neighboring property, that neighboring property is actually occupied. I worry that now your septic is going to be too close to their well.
There are also state setbacks that are required under state law to property lines and wells, and we
So
can't waive
if we
those.
waived the requirement and said you can go up to 50 feet, would you then be in compliant with the fact of the neighboring well?
No, we wouldn't. We have to comply with the setback to the neighboring well.
But could you?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the
If you
question.
go to 50 feet from this property line,
Oh,
right?
well, again,
Would you be able to still stay compliant in the neighboring lot?
John, do you want to weigh in on that? And again, the setback that we're talking about is only to the, that's what I was just going to say. The setback that we're referring to is only to the wetland line, not the property line. So
So you're trying to make it bigger?
towards, potentially in the direction of the property line. The other issue is, when you actually build it, it doesn't necessarily need to be a square.
Right.
So we're just sizing preliminarily to show that this is where we're hoping it'll go based on this perk rate. If it doesn't, if there are other elements at this location that you're concerned about, but I don't think there's an additional, and John, maybe you can tell us, is there a local bylaw that requires a more stringent setback to property lines and wells that you're aware of?
Good evening, John Martian from Farland Corp. I'm not aware of any local bylaws for property line setbacks or well
So you
setbacks.
have 100 feet between a well and the leaching unit.
Our Director of Health is shaking his head no.
Okay, so there's no local bylaw that's implicated by the concern that you're expressing?
Because we have the 100 feet setback. But if we change it to 50 feet, what if his well is 25 feet from his property line? Now it's in 70, now his well is in 75 feet of your septic.
Yeah, so I see those as two different issues. The only thing we're talking about, and you can actually see it on sheet, John, which sheet shows the 100-foot? It's one of the utility sheets. Yeah. It's actually shown on sheet 14. The only line we're talking about is where there's a 100-foot wetland buffer that's identified there. And it's actually to the reserve area. It's not even to the proposed primary area. So we could put the reserve area closer to that 100-foot line. That's the only line we're talking about. There's a wetland flag A83 and A82 that's west of the proposed primary. But I don't see any of the, I guess what I'm hearing is sort of connecting the wetland setback to protect an issue that's not otherwise protected under the local bylaw, because there's no more stringent local requirement for setbacks to property lines and setbacks to wells. We have to comply with the state requirement for that.
Right, but my question is, how far is the neighbor's well located to your proposed septic?
It's,
And if, I don't see it on any of this.
yeah, so the,
I know you did the ones on the, on the top of the property that's to the north, well, east, I guess, right? But I'm just concerned that if we allow you to lower the setback requirement to 50, then that could have a ill effect on the neighboring property.
so based on the geometry, that's two different issues, because I'm looking at sheet.
Well, okay, so I'm talking about my issue.
No, but I'm saying,
Right.
I'm saying it doesn't affect the other. It doesn't affect your issue. If you waive that 50-foot, if you waive the 100-foot, the direction that we're going in is west. The only well, I think the well that you're referencing, actually, it is shown on sheet, I think 14 is probably the best depiction. But that's,
It's crazy, yes.
actually 15, yeah, 15 probably is the best depiction here. And if you look at sheet 15, we're talking about,
Sheet 15 for me shows detention ponds. It doesn't show anything about,
is it this one here? Does it look like this?
No.
It's titled,
no, my sheet 15 looks like this.
I would,
Yeah.
so this is the March,
I've got May, so,
well, that's the original date. The revision date is March 28th, 2025. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a box with revision dates.
my latest revision is February 13, 2025.
Yeah, so that's an older iteration, but I'm happy to show you what,
Yeah. So, let me just, this is, I just want to get my bearings, east and west. So, 177 runs
East and west.
east and west, so it's north, south, east, and west. So east is, east is back into Westport, and west is into Tiverton, right? Okay,
Chairman Menard?
so you're just saying you're gonna move it east or west, you're not gonna move it north to south?
that's it, you nailed it. That's exactly what it,
Well, I thought you were moving it, so you're not really moving it closer to the property line then, if you do that.
correct, yeah,
Then why do you need the waiver of 100?
because we could go west towards the wetlands, which would be sort of further into our site, but the limiting factor is the state property line setback north-south. So we can't get any closer to the property lines there. That's what I was getting at.
Right, but our regulation is 100 feet.
To wetlands only, only
Okay.
wetlands. Has nothing to do with property lines, has nothing to do with wells,
Okay.
only wetlands.
Simon, you want to?
I was just going to clarify that, the septic plans, should you approve this, will come to the Board of Health, and all septic components have to be, this leach field has to be 100 feet under state law. So it doesn't matter how big it is, it doesn't matter where it is, they can't site it unless it's at least 100 feet away from all the wells. So the well is not an issue at the local waiver level because the state supersedes
Okay.
any concerns you.
I just didn't want it to say we'd waive something that would detrimentally affect someone's property rights next door. That's all.
That has to do with the wetlands, but not the well itself.
Okay. I mean, it already.
Sorry, we were looking at different plans as well. I think that might have added to the disconnect there, but hopefully.
No, it didn't. I think I needed to get my north, west, south, east, west bearings.
Good thing your chair spins around.
What? Yeah, I had to do north.
Sorry, is section 6 the only one that's been added since the last?
Correct. It was just that setback.
Because I briefly looked through this, because you have included some of the comments from the meeting that we had.
Yes. The revision date, June 18th, was an update of the waiver request list to incorporate sort of what is the minimum and some of the additional commentary that we tried to address during the discussion on the details.
Right, now the other, before I move on, board members, are there any other comments on the waiver list? This took us, what, 2-3 hours?
It's detail-oriented. We got granular, and, every board is different, but I can say we're definitely paying attention to the details here.
And we did talk about, there were other issues that had been brought up by the board in previous meetings, such as the safety issues of having 26 mailboxes all on 177, and the impacts of the HOA. And I know that, I think you took a swipe at this in your decision. Can you?
Sure.
outline what?
Sure. So we did meet with the Postal Service and asked them their opinion, and their suggestion, they were comfortable with a common mailbox bank installed on the west side of the entrance at Westport Lakes Drive and 177. So opposite the existing.
Where the big sign is?
Correct, yes.
Was there a consideration for Westport Lakes Drive being more fully built out?
That was their preference, and they consulted with whoever it is I would imagine they would have consulted with who's ever delivering.
But you weren't a part of that?
We were not part of that discussion.
Okay.
They just expressed,
There's quite a number of houses that could potentially add to that, so they add another batch of.
right. So we proposed that, and obviously, we had discussions with the board, and that's something that, we could see what the board's preference is, but, we inquired, and that was their suggestion.
Okay, so you have no issue with implementing a common mailbox? So it'd be something like what's on Forest Park, what's the other one, Oak Ridge?
Correct.
Oak Ridge and
Yeah,
Forest Park.
because having 28 mailboxes there is going to be a disaster.
The only thing in 177 is a lot different than the other situations of Forest Park.
Well,
I take it to be inland from 177 to the point where cars aren't gonna be stacking up on 177 to check their mail.
Right, right.
I know the other thing we had, the other issue that we had talked about a couple of times during the thing was the whole HOA concept. And I know you took another swipe at how the HOA would function.
Correct. Stormwater management is a common theme. I mean, all of the good, like the perfect properties were all built out in the 50s. And, so we're always dealing with wetlands and stormwater. So there are always basins that need to be maintained and cleaned out. So it's common to have conditions that the HOA, as part of their budget, provides for those expenses. And so we proposed language that would require as a condition pre-construction that the budget would be presented to show that there's sufficient funds based on projected cost to maintain the stormwater management system, and that would be reviewed by town council before the applicant's actually able to put a shovel in the ground to make sure that it's properly funded. And so we proposed language that we highlighted in the draft decision the conditions that were intended to address specific issues. And so the HOA condition is, and this is all subject
If you
to,
want to take a jacket off, it's getting warm in here.
it is getting warm in here. How about I just undo the tie a little? Is that all right?
I mean, we're all in T-shirts and.
You got the best seat.
I did tell him before we wouldn't be offended if you took his tie off.
Thank you. So it's subject to, and I just want to get this right.
What number?
So it's under C, general conditions. It starts at C2. It's actually lengthy. The applicant shall be responsible for maintaining and installation of all the stormwater management components. And then once, at such time as the operation and maintenance becomes the responsibility of the HOA association. So the applicant's responsible for it, and then it gets turned over at some point. But then as far as the annual inspections required, the HOA shall create the following separate accounts. One for maintenance and repair of the stormwater management system's basins. One for capital reserves for potential future repairs or replacement. One for maintenance and repair of the septic system leaching fields. And one for reserves for potential future repairs, again, of the septic system. I think it's repetitive there. It talks about the leaching fields twice. And again, all of this would need to be wordsmithed, but it says that the condition in the permit requires that these accounts are established. And it says the applicant shall fund the maintenance and repair accounts for 1 year's estimated maintenance and repair cost prior to issuance of the last occupancy permit. So before it gets turned over to the HOA, the applicant needs to make sure that there's some runway already there in the account. And then the HOA budget shall provide for all homeowners in the HOA to make contributions equal to 1/30th, which I guess is based on the potential lifespan. So you take the lifespan of the asset, if it's a 30-year replacement period, then the idea is you contribute so that 30 years, the money's there available. And if it's not, it's available to the homeowners association, and it increases the value of everybody's property to have a well-funded HOA. And I know there's a condition in here somewhere, but I don't see it highlighted readily, but it says that all of this is subject to the HOA documents. Here it is. The HOA shall adopt rules and regulations consistent with this decision, and a copy of the rules and regulations shall be provided to the board and town council for review prior to issuance of any occupancy permit, as described below. So before we can sell a unit, we have to make sure that town council and everybody agrees this is proper, it complies with the conditions that the board imposed to make sure that the repairs and maintenance and potential future replacement is adequately funded.
Okay, I think there was a lot of words, so let me give you my summary.
Could I ask a question about the HOA?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would expect that the Westport Lakes subdivision, whatever you want to call it, would have similar language before they were approved. But you see what that, kind of a mess that is. And so my question is, what is the protocol that will ensure that this stuff gets enforced? You can have all the money sitting there, but if somebody isn't responsible for seeing that it gets done, it'll be like Westport
Well,
Lake.
yeah, and that was going to lead into my summary, so thank you.
Right,
Okay.
right.
I have two concerns here, and that is, who actually does the maintenance while you are, up until the point that you are fully populated, who is responsible for all the HOA maintenance?
So-
And my second one is what does that HOA maintenance include? Now, obviously, it doesn't include things to do with the houses and everybody's wells and whatever, but it should always include the care and maintenance of the roadway, including snow removal, keeping clear lines of sight of all the intersections so that there's no safety issue, as well as what you talked about with the stormwater management and the leaching fields and all those things. So I'm really concerned with, I don't want to get in a position where you build 5 houses and
Right.
they become responsible for everything. So how are you going to manage, while you are building all these houses, who's responsible for doing all this work?
Chris, if I may. Mr. Chairman, if I may. Yeah,
Name and address.
I want Paul Cussin,
I know
Dolphic
we know who
Associates.
you are, but still, we have to do this.
Paul Cussin, Dolphic Associates. I'm the 40B consultant to the developer. I want to talk a little bit about the reserve. So this is an affordable housing development. So the budget that is going to be proposed has to be approved by Fannie Mae. It has to be Fannie Mae compliant. So in that budget is a requirement that 10%, a minimum of 10% of the total budget is a reserve line item. So that has to be done. In addition, in all of the purchase and sale agreements that we will have with every market rate and affordable buyer, they fund either 3 or 4 months in advance into a reserve replacement. So the first person who purchases a property puts, let's call it 4 months of reserve
Okay, but 4 months based on what?
on the budget. So what'll happen, it's a line item budget, as Chris had indicated. So the budget, let's just say for the sake of argument, is going to be $50,000 a year.
Okay.
Let's just say. So what will happen is that number is basically divided by the number of houses.
The number of planned houses, not the number of built houses.
That's right, the number of planned houses. So there are,
Divided by 38.
so there are 30,
38,000, it's $1,000 of,
okay, 38,000,
Easier for-
38,000, $1,000 a house
Yep,
per year.
per year.
Okay, and call that $100 a month.
Call it
$100 a month. So every purchaser has to provide $400 that goes into a separate checking account, into a reserve account. So when we have sold 38 houses, there's 38 times $400 into that reserve.
Okay,
Okay, and in addition, like I said, the lenders require that the budget be compliant with Fannie Mae. So we have to go into a detailed budget, and we have no issue with, town council and so forth, reviewing all of that. And to answer your question regarding who's responsible for the maintenance and so forth till all of that happens, there's what they call a turnover event. At some point in time, that development will be turned over to the homeowners association, and they will have a trustee that would be responsible, and every member of all 38 homeowners will have a share in that and be responsible for the payment on a monthly basis. But up until the turnover event, which typically, I'm not sure we've decided yet, but typically is going to be about 75% of the units. Up until that time, the developer is responsible for snow removal, maintenance, cleaning, brushing, all the things that have to be done.
Okay,
And we have no problem making that a condition.
okay.
My
So
concern
at that
is
point, though, that.
When you do have the 75% or whatever, who is going to, I understand it's a homeowner, board of directors and president.
They decide who.
But what
Yeah.
happens if they don't do it? Who is going to actually?
At some point in time, someone has to accept that responsibility. But typically, in all of the,
That's-
Briggs Landing is a fine example.
Yeah.
There's an association, a HOA, that has responsibility for all of the work that has to be done. And when we had the turnover event there, 75% of the units, they elected someone in the neighborhood to be in charge. And there are sometimes people who have more of accounting ability than other kinds of things. So they come up with a board, and there are rules and regulations as to what they can and can't do. And all of those would be reviewed by town council as the homeowners association.
My concern is if they don't do it, does a town agency have to step in and see to it that it gets taken?
In my opinion, no.
Yeah, Jerry, the issue at Westport Lakes
Yeah.
isn't, because it hasn't been turned over.
Right, I know.
Right, so
Right.
my issue isn't, I feel perfectly comfortable once it's turned over to the homeowners, that they will form an association with the president and blah, 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 and there'll be, there's always going to be those who like to get in everyone's business and will want to be a part of the board of the homeowners association. My concern is the time before the turnover event, because we have seen in one instance, the neighboring property, where the turnover event hasn't happened, and the developer has changed numerous times.
Right.
So what I'd like to see is not the developer is required, I think it's a requirement of the developer to hire a third party to oversee that. So when the developers change, and I guarantee the developers are gonna change in this instance, that there's still one person, and I don't mean a single person, I meant some sort of corporation that is responsible for that and can go back to the developer du jour and say, I need this much money for snow removal this year.
So,
What that might help is, in the case of a 40B development, if a developer there's a subsequent developer, we need to get an approval of the transfer of that permit from Mass Housing for that developer. So I think that can be handled rather than getting a third party involved, I think that can be handled legally, as it goes it goes from one developer to another. But all the developments we have been involved in, including the ones in Westport, have always been the developer's responsibility.
Attorney Pucci, again, if we were to grant this with whatever conditions we decide to put in as conditions, and they were to sell it to some other, are those conditions automatically imposed on a new person, or do you have to put that in the contract, in our decision to say, if you sell this, you have to,
It'll be in the permit that it runs with the land.
it'll be in the permit that it runs with the land, rather than, okay,
Correct.
right,
I
so
mean,
whatever.
Typically, if there is a period where the developer is responsible, that's typically what I see.
Mhm.
Then
So-
there are homeowner association requirements, there's a turnover at some point.
Right, so the way I'm understanding this, you're gonna start off with a kitty of 4 months, and then everybody, and again, I'm just to stay with the $100 a month, just because it's nice and easy. So, first homeowner is paying $100 a month, second, after he pays his $400 entrance fee. And then when the second homeowner moves in, he starts paying $100 a month, and third and fourth and fifth and whatever, and when you get to some magic number, up until that time,
The
you as-
developer
as
is,
the- As the builder are responsible for making all this happen until you turn it over to the homeowners association at the. at the.
correct.
I think
75%.
Chris Farland in the first meeting said what would normally happen is, you got 4 homeowners paying in of the 38 lots, so there's 34 lots that aren't sold yet. The developer is paying that portion of the homeowners association.
Right, no, not necessarily. I think we're combining two issues here. The other issue is surety to build out the site.
Yeah.
Okay,
And so I think for the unsold lots, it's more of a surety issue.
yeah.
That there's security to ensure that the improvements are completed and maintained, and you lose your surety bond. Part of what happened on Westport Lakes was the surety bond was released, years ago, and nobody had incentive to complete the
Right.
infrastructure,
Yeah,
to
so-
maintain it. So
So what would happen if you built 6 units and stopped?
that's a surety issue.
Okay.
And we couldn't start, so again, there's also in the permit, and all of this is subject to negotiation, maybe if there's some language, understanding the board's concerns, and these are not uncommon concerns. There are a lot of different ways to address making sure that you don't get, a house there with, making sure you don't get the Westport Lakes Drive result. So.
Exactly, I think what we're all concerned.
Right. And so that's in no one's interest. I mean, we wouldn't be able to sell houses if that's the case. So the mechanisms, it's just there's so many different options. I think what we proposed was that all the infrastructure needed to be complete before you start releasing occupancy permits. So you can't build a house without the road to access the house. And so we can wordsmith that and, make sure that it's drafted in such a way to address that specific concern. I proposed, and again, it goes on for pages.
I think an additional concern is, I know, you've got, and that's actually a very big cost, because you have to have that septic system in place for 38 houses before you can even start selling houses or up, right? That's a lot, I appreciate that's a huge cost. But what happens if you only sell 6 houses and none of them ever get sold? You said there's a surety issue, but then you have 6 houses trying to support the maintenance of a septic system meant for 38. And I think that could be an insurmountable cost to those owners.
So it's as written, the applicant's responsible for that, to make sure that it's maintained. And there's also Board of Health Title V regulations as well there are Title V regulations that require common systems.
You would still have to be maintaining it if there was only 6, because that would not be a turnover event.
Yeah, I would also, and we haven't, I don't think that's the intent of a project like this. I mean, this product is, 40B is more starter homes, workforce housing, that it's not, the $1 million lots that they're going to build big houses on and trying to sell for top dollar. I mean, obviously trying to sell for top dollar, but this type of product is in demand. Now, to plan for exactly what you're describing, the budget needs to be approved, and the board needs to look at how we propose to build out this particular site. The way it's written, we can't sell a house until the infrastructure is adequate to support the house. So everything's got to be completed. The budget's been approved, and then we need to, have a discussion about exactly to what extent is the budget funded, surety versus continual funding. And there's a surety requirement under Title V that maintains a common septic system. So that's another element that you need to show in approval of the budget. So you have to satisfy this board, the Board of Health, Fannie Mae, the DEP, the homeowners, town council. I mean, there are a lot of checks and balances. I haven't fully developed that yet. That's the type of condition that in projects where it's of heightened concern, I've literally sat next to town council at a table, and we've gone through it and made sure that it addresses the board's concern, and it satisfies the developer's concern that they're able to build the project. So it's not, we understand the concern. I think town council's heard it. It's something that the board could say, we are, if the board were to take a straw vote or were to, agree to say that this is, able to move forward based on the waivers, then the board could take a vote subject to the crafting of conditions consistent with our deliberations to address an HOA that is properly funded and surety, a surety mechanism that ensures that the town has funds and, you know, one of the ways we deal with it is the town can almost get a mortgage on lots. And if the applicant doesn't do what the applicant's supposed to do, or the developer doesn't do, the town can auction off the lot to pay for the expense. So, you know, there are mechanisms you can build in. What precisely, you know, this board wants to see for that mechanism, you know, remains to be seen. Maybe you could hear testimony from town council as to how he solved the concern in other towns, because I know it's a common concern, and every board's different as to how they want to see it done.
And again, this concern is only because of, I don't want to start another argument, but it's only because of Bradford Dean, who was
That's
the
right.
original developer of Westport Lakes Road, who then got bored and sold it, and it isn't going well. That's our biggest concern.
we're
that
dealing
I
with-
think that we all have, I'm going to speak for ourselves. I have a bad taste in my mouth that actually Mr. Dean will actually stay through this project. That's all. I don't want any more arguments about this.
No,
that's just-
I will say,
I'd like to say.
You can say
something
something,
on
I just
that.
don't want to,
I'd like
I don't
to
want to
say-
get, I don't want it to cause an argument that we've had, I think, a couple of meetings before you were even here.
That's my fundamental concern with all of this, is that we're dealing with somebody that that failed and that jerked the town around, and the people that actually bought property with the Westport Lakes project. So we haven't even got, here's the thing, so this project is accessed through a private road that belongs to the Westport Lakes project. Is this, just leave it.
Yeah, I'm shaking from the heat.
Is this project going to pay for the maintenance of that road in terms of snow removal and upgrades that need to be made to the Westport Lakes Road, at least to where it connects to go up into this project? Because all of a sudden you have 35, 38, 39 people, houses coming in, and now they're using a private road that's never been finished or maintained. And is it going to be up to the people that really kind of got the shaft from Mr. Dean first time around? Is it going to be now up to them to have to accommodate this project?
so I would offer 2 points to the board. Going back to the first comment, the town always has the upper hand. Whether it's withholding occupancy permits, withholding building permits. What I saw is, and again, I came in late in the game, but my understanding was that there was surety released at some point in time. This surety mechanism will be reviewed so that the board is comfortable that surety is not released, whether it's lots, if we pledge lots, whether we agree not to release occupancy permits, whatever that surety is, it won't be released, and the town has the upper hand to ensure that if someone complains, they could file enforcement action with the town, and the town could foreclose on a lot, okay, and have a remedy that way. My perception is that the town gave away the upper hand there. And I don't know the history.
Seems like it, but they never followed up on it,
I
but
don't
they're.
think the surety has been released either.
No,
It was
it's still there.
$123,000,
But it's insufficient.
and what happened is,
It's insufficient.
cost of goods went up.
Yeah.
So
So whatever the case, there are mechanisms to ensure surety and the upper hand. The other thing, and during the work session, the issue of the condition of Westport Lakes was raised. And, you know, we're trying to sell houses, we're going to be trying to sell houses, or the developer's going to sell houses, and we don't want someone going through, that condition, because you're going to have, trouble marketing.
Yeah.
So we actually, and there were concerns, someone raised a concern about backing out on Westport Lakes Drive and the vegetation interfering with sightlines. The owner of this property has rights over Westport Lakes Drive. We have the right to pass and repass, okay? We don't own it, but we have the right to pass and repass over it. And so we offered a condition that says that we are going to, the applicant's responsible for clearing vegetation to ensure that sightlines are maintained on Westport Lakes Drive. So it would be an appropriate condition to say, look, you have the right to pass and repass over that. You're using that for your access. You got to figure out a way to clean it up. I don't care how you do it, applicant, but there's a condition that says it needs to be maintained.
That is a good starting point, right? Because exactly, it's like you want to make sure your 38 people who bought houses from you can get actually into.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And we're not the developer. The prior project was sold. Mr. Dean moved on, and the current applicant, Coastal Harvest, is responsible. But we have the private right to access that, and so there's some mechanism under the law to say, hey, listen, you're not maintaining adequate access, and we could try to compel that, and it would be up to us to
Right,
do
'cause
it.
you have the right to access, that means they have to give you the right.
Right,
They
so-
have to give you the right to access, and they're not really doing that.
Right, exactly. I think
So
you
then
hit the
you
nail
could
on the head.
enforce, you could enforce against Coastal Harvest about maintenance and repair of the road.
Yeah, and we,
And a number of times, Mr. Cousins has said that you're in a good relationship with Coastal Harvest, because you're gonna have to ask them, because I think the mailboxes
Right.
are on Coastal Harvest property.
Right.
So you have to. And have you also discussed or considering discussing with them some sort of joint agreement between the two HOAs that would would help making sure that both roads are adequately cleared, Westport Lake Roads and Golf Lake View Road, or whatever road is going to be named when the development goes up?
I don't know if it would take the form of an agreement, but if it's a condition of this permit that Westport Lakes Drive be maintained in a certain condition so that sightlines are maintained at a minimum, then we would have to find a way to do it if we were able to reach an agreement to allow the Pine Ridge HOA to clear vegetation within the layout of Westport Lakes Drive, then that's something we'd need to explore. But,
I would like to add not just sightlines, but snow plowing, because technically, you may not have the right to pay somebody to plow, even if you wanted to, but
You can't get to
I
your.
don't know that you want to. So I just want to be sure that the snow plowing and maintaining in the wintertime is dealt with.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul Cussin, Delphic Associates. I don't think we would have a problem with the condition of maintaining the roadway from 177 up to the access to the development. That would be a condition, I think, that we can live with. You see any problems with that, Chris?
yeah, I mean, it would have to be, obviously, we don't want to put down a top coat right before, while we're in
No, I'm
construction.
talking about the maintenance and the operating, the snow removal, all of those things, the
Yeah.
clearing of the side, being sure that it's halfway decent and
Yeah,
that
and
it's
it-
properly maintained. We're not gonna finish the road, but we will maintain it.
But you would finish it afterwards?
I'm sorry?
Would you finish it afterwards, or would you leave?
No, it's not it's not our responsibility, it's not our land, but we could maintain it. Now, my understanding is the town is going through a process right now with Coastal Harvest. So that's gotta go through the process as to what they're gonna require him to do or them to do. And we're not involved, and I don't know all of those issues, but I know that there's ongoing discussions with the planning board, the Board of Health, everybody, and I think DEP is involved, and So the main road, the access, making sure that that the kiosk for the mail is maintained and all of that, I don't see we would have a problem with maintaining that.
Within the layout of
Within
the
the
right
layout,
of way, within the layout of the right of way, because we have access rights, we have, whether prescriptive, deeded, or otherwise, we have the right, and we have the right to have a nice road. So we would be able to compel the result.
Let's
of
say,
brush
let's
removal.
say all of a sudden, tomorrow, Coastal Harvest paves that road, the whole Westport Lakes Drive, gets it up to the spec in which it was always supposed to be. And then you damage it during your construction, you're required to fix that, right?
Sure, yeah, that's
So
right.
why, so,
Do that road because he's got too many houses.
He's gonna, as a practice,
I'm just saying, what
Right.
if?
If he did, okay.
Right. What if? It's not gonna, I know, I know it's gonna happen. So if you do damage to the existing structure of the road, you're still responsible for fixing part of that. You may not be, you have to at least get it back to the condition it is in today, right?
right, and it, at all times, it needs to provide safe and convenient access.
So if during the construction, the heavy machinery going over that small section of Westport Lake Drive gets disturbed because of directly of work that you're doing, you would be responsible to repair Westport Lakes Drive to the condition it was prior to.
At a minimum,
Yeah,
yes.
at a minimum.
Correct. And I think that type of thing is usually addressed in the O&M plan, the operation and maintenance that describes, damage and repair caused by vehicles and that sort of thing.
What about the safety of the Westport Lakes Drive residents compared with the safety of the Pine Ridge residents in terms of traffic and having a way to walk down their street without being subjected to a lot more traffic now? I hear that, I read that you're going to put sidewalks in the Pine Ridge property, right? Because of safety concerns and wanting to provide people a way to walk around the neighborhood.
I think it's a state requirement, it's a state requirement now.
I'm sorry,
I
say,
think that's a state requirement for new constructions.
It is a state requirement?
not,
What's the
No.
state requirement?
no,
Sorry.
not state.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Brian Dunn with MBL, that is not a state requirement.
Okay.
That's under the subdivision rules and regulations, whether or not it needs to be provided or not. But in most towns, if they do grant waivers on sidewalks, say if it's asked for two sides, they'll waive it to one side. But all the crosswalks and other things like that have to be ADA compliant. That's a state regulation.
Okay.
But the sidewalks in themselves are not.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I just wondered, what sort of, is there anything that you, to work with Coastal Harvest to provide that amenity or that safety concern to the people that live there now?
Right. Not sidewalks per se, but there is, as I indicated, this commitment to clear vegetation and to compel Coastal Harvest to clean up the right-of-way within the right-of-way, which extends beyond the paved width. So the right-of-way extends beyond the paved width. There's a shoulder and grass that you could also walk along that right now, and I did have a chance to drive Westport Lakes Drive. I've seen it. It's overgrown. There's invasive plant species. And so I think a weed whacker will go a long way. And frankly, having somebody bring a lot of money in to clean this up and make a financial commitment to this is going to compel, ultimately, a cleanup of that right-of-way. Because we can't sell units,
Right.
fighting
Yeah, I
not
wouldn't, if that whole development was all done and I drove up Westport Lake Drive, I don't think I would actually turn onto Gulfview. I'd turn right around.
Right, and as Mr. Cussin indicated, it's in the works. We're already compelling Coastal Harvest.
It's also a safety issue for the folks you're selling the houses to, right? Because some people may want to walk down to their mailbox,
Right.
but there is no sidewalk, right? So,
Once it's cleaned up and maintained, the right-of-way is much wider than the
Yeah.
paved width, and right now, the vegetation is encroaching on the paved width. So it's beyond, like, once it's opened up, it's going to feel you're going to have much better sight lines. And that's the ultimate goal and result. And my understanding is that there was a holdup because some of the vegetation clearing that was being proposed and done was within potentially wetlands buffers. So we're forcing Coastal Harvest to get a DEP permit or to update the DEP permit to clear as needed. And if that's not accurate, then somebody please correct me.
Mr. Chairman, again, Paul Cusson. Regarding your point about the sidewalks for Westport Lakes Road, there was a condition of that approval that did not require sidewalks, so there's no way you can ask him to I mean, you could ask, but there's no way you can comply, can make him put the sidewalks in unless he just wants to. So there's nothing that in the regulations or his approval that required the sidewalks.
But in your plan, it talks about sidewalks.
Our plans go out up to Westport Lakes Road, so we're putting the sidewalks in on one side, all the way up to Westport Lakes Road. And like Chris was saying, my understanding is that roadway is a 40-foot layout. So the paved area is 24 feet, so you still have, on one side, it's probably going to be 4 feet. On the other side, it's about 8 feet. So there's, once that area is is cleaned and so forth, there's going to be, even though there's not a paved sidewalk, there's an area to walk based on the plans that were approved by the town.
I can also mention that right now, or at least in the recent past, there have been and there are some issues with the planning board with just regular subdivisions that didn't get sidewalks put in. One of them recently, I remember Stacy Lane, didn't have sidewalks, but the planning board was trying to force them to have them. But then they throw, how about this one and that one? They don't have them. And so there's ongoing issues about sidewalks, even with the regular planning board.
All right, any other comments from the board? I know we did have a lengthy email from Pereira, so rather than reading it, you want to come up and describe what your comments were?
Brent Pereira, 26 Westport Lakes Drive. I don't know that I could possibly just, other than reading that whole email that I sent verbatim, I don't know that it would be proper for me to stand up here and just regurgitate what I sent the board. I do believe that you're going to take that all into consideration appropriately and understand a lot of our concerns. Just if I could just address a couple of things that were talked about today. As far as the mailboxes is concerned, most of that where it connects to 177, it's state highway. They would not be able to do that unless they got state highway permission. And there was some talk about the current owner, Coastal Harvest, being okay with putting a mailbox set up there, which is surprising because they're not even okay to do that for us of Westport Lakes Drive at the moment. I would be surprised if they would want to put a mailbox set up on property that they're trying to sell for this development, Pine Ridge Estates. It would be surprising if they would comply with that request as they suggested, because that hasn't happened for us. As far as the HOA is concerned, I have significant concern with as far as their HOA and the HOA that doesn't really exist for Westport Lakes Drive. There's an HOA document that was filed with the transfer or the initial subdivision approval, and as well as with the transfer to Coastal Harvest, which is the current developer that's responsible for the roadway, which, by the way, still hasn't done anything since they were directed to do that by the planning board, other than just clear cut a bunch of stuff, and which is now already grown back. Westport Lakes Drive, even though an HOA technically exists on paper, it doesn't belong to the homeowners because we only have 5 houses. I don't think anytime relatively soon that the rest of the development is going to get situated with the rest of the house lots to the point where the HOA would even be turned over to the residents of Westport Lakes Drive. I mean, it's been 20 years, almost 19 years since Westport Lakes Drive was first started and approved, and until now, it is only 5 houses, and one of them was built by Brad Dean. So only 4 other houses were built in a matter of 18 years to this point. To think that all of a sudden, because this project is going to get built up in the woods off of Westport Lakes Drive, now all of a sudden Westport Lakes Drive, the developer is going to get off his horse and start building more houses. I find that very hard to believe. We of Westport Lakes Drive, at some point, are going to be responsible for all of that road. 38 houses. We only have 5 now. 38 houses, probably 2 cars per family, maybe 80 cars back and forth. I don't know how we potentially at some point would be responsible for the upkeep of the portion of Westport Lakes Drive from Golfview Lane to Route 177. I don't know how you could even put that on the responsibility of ours as a board, taking consideration for the town residents. It just seems mind-blowing that if considering the track record of Westport Lakes Drive and considering that what they're essentially doing now was the second phase of what was supposed to be the original big subdivision plan, and then they didn't even finish the first phase, and now they're trying to do the second phase without finishing the first phase, regardless if the property was sold to another developer. It's like a scapegoat to me. You're just putting the blame on somebody else, but the blame for nearly 17 years was on the current applicants for the 40B. I just don't understand how that could be allowed to occur. You fail in one method, where at the phase 1 portion of the project, and now you want to do phase 2 when you didn't even complete phase 1. It makes no sense. And to stand here and argue that the current developer and the current applicant for the Pine Ridge Estates, they have no real relationship. Well, I know I've been over that, and that's pretty well proven that they're together, they know each other, and if it was that easy, if they're okay with all of that stuff, then why hasn't anything happened yet for Westport Lakes Drive? Not a single thing, other than clear cutting with a brush hog, and then the attorney for the applicant suggests that they're compelling Coastal Harvest to finish the road. They're not compelling Coastal Harvest. The town, the DEP, all of the regulations and all of the things that they were required to do under the first proposal, they have not accomplished, regardless if it's a new developer and somebody totally different. Those requirements have not been finished. The SMS hasn't been finished, hasn't been certified. The roadway isn't finished. The Mass Highway Access Permit has long expired. I'm assuming that they're trying to get a new permit for the connection to Route 177, which I've argued for this whole process, where how do you deem this road viable or a reliable access point for this 40B, 38 houses, when Westport Lakes Drive there's no permit to connect to 177. It's not finished. The SMS, to which they claim they're going to hook into the stormwater of Westport Lakes Drive, which has not been finished or completed, they expect to connect their portion into Westport Lakes Drive portion. None of it's been done. The town currently holds a Form F covenant on the parcel for the proposal for the 40B for the Pine Ridge Estates. They hold it in covenants to where they cannot build, they cannot transfer a sale until Westport Lakes Drive is completely finished. The last planning board meeting that I stood in front of, they explained to me that Westport Lakes Drive is going to have to be completely finished before the subdivision parcel for the 40B will be released to be able to do anything. And that is right to top coat asphalt. And then there was some conversation about the current developer potentially not finishing the road before this project is begun. I don't think that's even possible because of the covenant that the town holds. And my understanding is that they're not going to release that until the road is completely finished. Just to go back on that one portion, considering the HOA issue, I know the board has some concerns, we have concerns as well. If they want this there, I understand they have right-of-way access, which was written in long ago because they owned it. They owned all of it. The current applicant owned all of it in the beginning. So obviously they would write in the right of access to get to the Phase 2 portion. We of Westport Lakes Drive should not be responsible for any portion of that roadway that from Golfview to 177, plowing, maintenance, any of it. If they want that, they should be accepting to take over the responsibility for 38 people, 38 families, when we only have 5. They should be covering the cost and maintenance for that first portion of the road that is the only way for them to gain access to the Pine Ridge Estates development. It's the only way. Why should we have to pay for them? Why should we have to bear the responsibility? The roadway hasn't been maintained in 17, 18 years. There's underground culverts. All of that stuff has to be situated and settled in compliance before any of this can happen. There was some talk about price points. There was some concern from the board where, what happens if nobody actually wants to buy these pieces of property? I'd like you to take this under consideration. Westport Lakes Drive has been a thing since the early 2000s. The road was put in place between 2007 and 2008, and 1 house was built. And now there's 5 in nearly 18 years. Anybody could stand here and go and understand how valuable land is in Westport and how quickly lots could sell if you wanted to sell them. Why are we going to stand here and say these 38 houses are going to sell no problem, but the ones that on Westport Lakes Drive just stay stagnant and undeveloped? It doesn't make any sense. Mr. Cusson, in one of the first few meetings, mentioned the price point that they would potentially sell these houses for. I'm curious to know what the price point is. There was some price point in the application where it's like between $600,000 and $700,000 per house for these 2 to 3 bedrooms on non-conforming lots, which is with a significant HOA that's going to have a pretty big bill to pay for maintenance, for the SMS, for the shared septic, for all the pumping structure that's involved. It's just destined to fail. If you look at what Westport Lakes Drive is right now, it's a failure. If I had known what I know now, because Mr. Dean left all of the information when he sold me the house from the original proposal, I would not have bought the house. If I had known they were planning on putting 38 houses back there, I would have probably wouldn't buy it. One of the co-applicants actually owns a couple of the lots on Westport Lakes Drive. I'm curious to know if Shannon, if she pays an HOA fee like the rest of the house, like the rest of the subdivision. There's deeded lots that are registered to you. Okay. Okay.
Let's not
Through the
get into
chair.
arguments here. He's just making your comments.
I'll digress for now. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else in public? Go
Sure.
ahead.
Hey, Almaderos, 48 Old County Road. I don't live in that area there, I live across the street on 177. In regards to the HOAs, I know basically topped a lot of the questions that I had, but one concern that I have, once this is all done and sealed, who will be policing the association or the town to make sure that the leaching fields, the water collecting systems, the swells, and everything else that goes along are updated? Updated meaning they're maintained, they cleaned. Because as we know, these swells, as time goes on, there's walls. Due to time, as time goes on, the land will settle into a point which I've seen the size of those collecting ponds there become lower than the swells itself. So where the water's supposed to be going originally, it's flowing into adjacent neighbors. Will we have, or will the town, or is anybody thinking about having some sort of a police to monitor this as we go on, not only with this one here, but any other future developments? Thank you.
Brent Pereira, 26 Westport Lakes Drive. I would just like to make a correction on something that I said before. Not registered in Shannon Quarry, but Blue Cat. And we all know where Blue Cat originated from. Blue Cat is the original owner, or the Midway owners of the Blue Cat LLC, of the entire development for Westport Lakes Drive at one point, before these old coastal harvests. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Stacy Pereira, 26 Westport Lakes Drive. Through the chair, I just have a couple of questions and a little bit of confusion. When we started this meeting, you had said about one of the waivers as far as the setbacks for the front feet and the back. Can you rephrase that? Because for some reason, I thought I heard 6 feet for the back.
No, well,
That's the
that
standard.
is the zoning requirement. They are actually going to mandate 25 feet from the back.
Okay. Because when I just did a quick Google search as far as setbacks for Westport,
25, 10, 10, and 6.
Right.
okay.
25 in the front,
25, 10 from the side, 6 from the back is the zoning requirement.
and they're proposing 20 in the front and 25 in the back.
10 from the side.
I think
So I thought I had seen 30 in the back when I just did a quick search for Westport, but I don't, it was just
Six.
Google. Can't believe everything Google says.
25 is 6.
Okay. The other question that as far as the mailbox, the centralized units, I was just wondering through the chair if we could ask what was the mail that they had, the postal that they had spoken to?
They said they talked to the post office.
Right, I was just curious on whom. Were you able to ask through them?
Yeah.
Through you, are you able to ask that
I
question?
think we should.
And then another question that I would also have is if they did mention the property and the location, as far as it being, if it was state,
For the mailboxes?
yes, if it was state-owned or not, if that was told to the postman as well.
Can you give us a little more detail about whatever?
I was actually just asking that question again, because we did inquire with the post office. Their preference would be the bank.
Could you give us a name of?
No, actually, I don't have a name. But what I would say is, they also offered that they could do PO boxes at the post office. So there would be no mail service. And the applicant's actually okay with that as a means to provide mail service, that they would just go to the PO box If that's a real concern with the board, the preference again is the west side of the entrance, but if there's a real concern there, the alternative would be PO boxes. And they said that's feasible there are 3 post offices that would have the option to offer PO boxes. They have the capacity, and that's an option. But that's the board's discretion. You could go either way.
Okay. So, another question through the chair, was there a price for these homes?
There was, I remember.
There was, and I couldn't find it.
There was
There was a sheet
an
in the
initial
book.
price schedule, I believe, in the beginning. And I remember it was in the 500s, but maybe
It was in the binder, and I can't find it.
yeah.
I was looking
I
for
thought
it.
it was higher than that.
Was it like that?
Yeah.
Unless the customer
I
would
think it
know.
was 700.
Just ask.
But I mean, this was like 6 months ago.
The price points of the.
The price
units.
point.
It's whatever the market will do.
But what was your,
But you had a,
We had,
you had stuff, the first meeting.
Yeah.
well,
I just can't seem to find, and I could have sworn it was in the book.
in the pro forma, see that?
It most likely was in the application that we submitted to Mass Housing, a site eligibility application. And that's where we did a financial analysis. And we have to be a limited dividend organization, so we've got to go through all that. And at that time, it's a best guess, and there was a market study that was done that was submitted to Mass Housing and also submitted to the town as part of the site eligibility process. And that's, I think, where you saw the numbers. My recollection was around the $600,000 price range. That's the market rate houses. So if you remember, there are 38 houses, 25%, 10 of them have to be sold to low and moderate income buyers who, I'd have to relook at the numbers, but for a family of 4, I think it's roughly about $85,000, $90,000 a year to qualify. So those would be sold at prices that would most likely be in under $300,000. The market rate houses, we had proposed around about $600,000. There was some 2-bedroom units, some 3-bedroom units, that they were different prices. But the reality is, whatever the market will bear at that time. So we're not compelled to sell them at those prices. So that could be higher, it could be lower.
I'd just like to ask a question.
I'm sorry?
While we're on that subject, 2 questions. One is, do the affordables pay the same maintenance fee? And the second one, have you determined yet who the monitoring agents will be?
Bless you.
Thank you.
Yes. Trying to remember who they were. I believe the monitoring agent here is Neighborhood Works.
Okay, not Chapman.
No, CHAPA doesn't do monitoring any longer. They do other things, but they don't do any. I think Westport Lakes Road CHAPA might have been the monitoring agent there. So it's whoever Mass Housing selects as the monitoring agent.
Okay, sure.
And just so you understand what monitoring is, so what happens is that Delphic goes through a housing lottery process. And when we get applications, we have to determine the income. We need 3 years tax returns, like a lender would. So we want to be sure that they qualify income-wise, asset-wise, household size-wise, and so forth. And we then put all of those applicants into a lottery. As the first applicant comes up, we then take all of the information that we have determined, we submit that to the monitoring agent, who then will confirm our findings. So they don't do the lottery, they don't do any of that. So we make our findings, and that's confirmed by the monitoring agent. They're also involved in resale. So those affordable units have to stay affordable in perpetuity. So when they go to resell a house, they can only sell it at a certain price, and that's based on the resale multiplier in the deed rider. So a buyer, and it's clear in our purchase and sale, and it's clear in our lottery package, that they then have to call a monitoring agent and say, hey, I want to sell an affordable. The town of Westport has first right of refusal. Then it can go to another affordable buyer who's qualified at that time, whenever that happens, whatever the limits are for assets and that sort of thing.
How about maintenance fee?
Maintenance fee, we could do that two ways. We could make everybody pay the same. And my understanding on the condominium law, and this is not a condominium, but we would look at that as well, that, so for example, I'll use another development that we're involved in. The market rate houses are $900,000, and the affordables are $300,000. The 900, the people who are paying $900,000 are paying 3 times as much in the fee. So we would like to structure it so that the fee is lower for the affordable buyers. But we have to go through that process, and that's going to have to be approved by Mass Housing, and that gets along with the budget that we talked about earlier. So what happens, the pricing is determined based on someone who is at 80% of the area mean income, spending no more than 30% of their income for principal, interest, taxes, the budget, and all those kinds of things. So it's something we do all the time, but it makes it fair to the affordable buyers.
I have a quick question. Like,
go ahead,
this
I
mine
want-
is, mine is completely off what we're talking about. Continue, please.
So my concern is we're building these affordable living homes, and yet we're going to have them pay for PO boxes potentially and HOA also. So, I thought affordable living was for, to try to decrease their expenses, not increase them.
I don't think they pay for the post office boxes.
What is it?
I don't, if the mail doesn't get delivered, the post office boxes, I think, are free. That's within the point, isn't it, or no?
They didn't say that. Yeah, he didn't mention.
I don't think they're free. I
Yeah.
thought they were free too, but.
Yeah, I think at the point they are.
No, but that's-
Corrected though. Yeah.
No, he didn't mention that to me.
All right.
No, the chair,
$25
Maybe-
a year for the PO box.
he didn't mention that it would be free. I believe I had asked because I was curious on how much a PO box costs.
$225 a
The
year.
other,
$225 a year.
yeah,
$225 for the small one. If I may, excuse me, Mr. Chair, through the chair, I pay $225 a year for a PO box in Somerset. I don't know if it's the same rate here in Westport.
it was around that.
Depends on the size.
All right.
Right, it depends on the size.
Okay, I don't need to hear what everybody's paid for post office boxes.
We were hopping on HOAs still to this day. I mean, we brought it up in the first meeting. They were very persistent on HOAs as far as Westport Lakes Drive and all this. And like we discussed today, how an HOA is supposed to be started and how, the developer does part of the part or starts off with the funding, yada, yada, yada. So I just want the board to be aware that 4 residents currently right now on Westport Lakes Drive have signed a contract. But till this day, I don't think had any payment since they've been residents. So Coastal Harvest has not asked for payment for the duration that they've been residents at Westport Lakes Drive. I'm not sure if the board was aware of that. Also, the mention of cars, I know Mr. Pereira had said something about 2 vehicles per household. There are current residents that have 6 children living in the house, so that would be 8 vehicles per one household. We have 2 drivers, we have 5 cars. So was there driveways for this development? Because my concern is not only the traffic, but when you have 38 houses that could potentially have more than 2 vehicles, what happens? People start parking on the street. And then I feel like that's a safety issue. And I believe that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask, is this the last open public meeting until it
We haven't
closes?
decided yet.
Okay.
It's
I
likely.
mean, I would rather not take any more of your time today if there's going to be another opportunity to speak at another meeting, so I just,
It's likely this may be the last.
all right, then real quick, as far as my email is concerned, there are a couple of things that were set in place, like I said before, on the original subdivision plan and all of the proposals that went through. And I would hope that the board would take those under consideration, that they still are in effect from the original subdivision plan and all of the process that they went through back in 2000 through 2008. More specifically, that they follow all Department of Environmental Protection superseding order of conditions which were in place for Westport Lakes Drive and the entire landmass of the 40B proposal, SE-80-1121, set via the original permitting process for the entire landmass of Westport Lakes and Pine Ridge. Follow through with the MEPA requirements set forth in the final Environmental Impact Report, EOEA 12703, and the Certificate of the Secretary of Engineer and Environmental Affairs, specifically but not limited to the requirement that MEPA set in the approval process, that if there were any future developmental efforts on the parcel to which the Pine Ridge Estates currently is being placed on, that MEPA would have to be notified of that. I just need to make sure that could potentially be in a condition to make sure that all of these things that were set into place back in the early 2000s for the original proposal still get held accounted for this one. So again, the MEPA requirement to file a notice of project change, and as well as follow the stipulations to the DEP SE 801121. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I just add to what he just spoke about? And that is, I don't think we've discussed it, but even if we have, I'd like to see it be a part of whatever conditions we have, and that is that no part of this project can be used to access another project. We had a situation in town with one of our similar projects where the developer bought a lot and used it as the access point to start another subdivision.
I have one question for the attorneys. Part of the permitting process is that the applicant has to have site control. And in the draft that you had given us, you say site control by virtue of the written purchase and sale agreement, which is in the book. However, that actually has a provision that the deed was to be delivered on or before January 5th, 2025. That hasn't been done. There is also a provision in this, is if the permitting didn't happen, they could extend this agreement. So is a purchase and sale really control of the property? And I'm asking the two of you.
Yeah, I can answer that if the chair likes. It's actually, the purchase and sale agreement does not control. The project eligibility letter determines site control, and that determination is definitive. I've litigated that issue to the appeals court under a case called Bruce LLC. But I would just let you know, thank you for catching that detail. We noticed that as well, and we actually did have an extension to the purchase and sale agreement signed that we can submit to the
So
board.
then really the applicant does not have site control by the virtue of the purchase and sale. The applicant has site control by the virtue of the grant.
It's actually both.
Yeah.
The
Well, I mean.
I mean, a lot could go wrong, but, in a purchase and sale until,
My answer was gonna be the first answer. I do think it would be useful and relevant to produce that updated document, the extension. While I have the floor and you're listening, I'm sitting here still confused about what is going on with that roadway, who's really under control, regardless of issues specifically in your jurisdiction. And a lot of this can be tied to a certificate of occupancy, because if there's not safe access, building inspector can certainly deny a certificate of occupancy, but it would definitely benefit the process if we could seek to get some clarity on, you know, what's gonna happen with that roadway. Are they gonna finish it? What is the story? Who's taking responsibility? So, you know, I don't know if it comes through the planning board or through the applicant, but I think it would benefit the process if we find out more about that. And then on just the simple answer to your questions, that there is project eligibility letter controls.
Okay.
So that renders them an eligible applicant, and I have seen issues come up before that people question the information in the PEL, and you can go back to the subsidizing agency and complain, but you can't make them an ineligible applicant by raising issues to challenge the PEL at your stage. Somebody has to go back to the subsidizing agency, say something's inaccurate on it, please reconsider this. And I can tell you it's a very difficult, cumbersome process, and they're not really subject to challenge. Because I've handled some of the lawsuits trying to challenge it. Basically, it's sort of a catch-22. They refer to completing the administrative process before anybody can challenge them, but the administrative process is the very thing that the PEL gave power to.
Yeah.
So it's just so the unsatisfying, very short answer is the PEL makes them an eligible applicant as sufficient for site control. But I reiterate, I heard groans and stuff about the roadway. We need to figure it out, because you're gonna ultimately ask me most likely to look at council's draft and make proposed revisions and put another draft before you. And I'm gonna look very hard at the status of what's going on there and what comments you've received from planning board and the town planner. And I'm gonna try to figure out a way, as best I can, to protect the health and safety of the existing neighborhood and the future residents of that project, which is certainly within your jurisdiction. So I just kind of wanted to give a heads up. Maybe other people smarter than me figure out what's going on and who's gonna end up finishing this, but I'm sitting here still confused about really a fundamental issue about this, because there's not a whole heck of a lot in your control, really, under 40B, but you can certainly make sure that there's safe access required.
We do have a note, we do have input from the highway department saying that it is I forget the word they use, but it is even though it's a private road, it is still, it meets the requirements for the width and how it was built. Now, it's not, obviously it's not finished, we all know that.
Yeah.
But there's no requirement for it to be finished either.
I'm just saying it's an issue of concern that's been
Yes,
raised, and
yes,
I think,
absolutely.
you know,
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I agree with town council. I'm really hearing that as sort of like the last issue, that if we can really get a comfort level on this issue, that, you know, we might be able to get to a position where we're talking about a permit with conditions that would allow this to go forward. We've indicated we can't develop and sell a project where the access is ugly, okay? And there certainly should be some mechanism by which this development can have requirements that the access is maintained from 177 into our development in a certain condition. And I would refer back to the first letter I wrote to the board when I got involved, and we already mentioned it tonight. We're proposing conditions that would require us to compel Coastal Harvest to help clear that right-of-way, and at least in the interim. But there are also conditions that could be imposed on the back end. So back with my original letter, I wrote, nevertheless, Pine Ridge is willing to have a reasonable discussion about what conditions might be appropriate to ensure that that portion of Westport Lakes Road from Route 177 to Golfview Lane is repaired and finished following completion of construction work on Pine Ridge Estates to the extent construction traffic affects the condition of Westport Lakes Road. Conditions to issuance of the last occupancy permit, and I think that was mentioned. We've reiterated we don't own Westport Lakes Road, but we have rights to pass and repass, and we can certainly, if it comes to that, compel the owner. We're not the developer and responsible for the condition of that, but it's not inappropriate for you to say, look, if you're going to access it over that, access your development over that road, then it needs to at least have good sight lines and be in good condition before you're out of the project. So as a condition to final occupancy, what that looks like, is up for discussion. I mean, we talked about making sure that damage is repaired. We talked about making sure that it's maintained with brush cleared within the right-of-way. Those are appropriate conditions.
Could you provide us with the, I assume, easement document that gives you the right of way to pass?
I believe it was written in the original deed that the right to access was reserved.
In the original deed, but you don't have a deed for this property yet.
It was a reservation. It was a reservation when the property was conveyed to Coastal Harvest. They reserved the right to use Westport Lakes Drive for all purposes, including this purpose.
And we submitted a copy of that deed. It was the deed from when Blue Cat sold it to Coastal, that they retained the right for pass and repass. And that was in the deed that we did submit.
So, but how does Pine Ridge get that?
All rights that we own, that were reserved to us as the owner,
But
will
you're
be
not the owner
conveyed.
yet.
Well, they're all rights through the purchase and sale agreement. When the purchase and sale agreement is prosecuted and it goes to closing, then any rights that we have as the owner will be conveyed to Pine Ridge. And Pine Ridge, inherent in those rights, will have the right to pass and repass.
But you're not the owner of Blue Cat. So,
No,
Mr.
Blue Cat's
Cousins
already
has said-
reserved that right, and that Blue Cat,
Blue Cat's selling this property.
Yes, Blue Cat
Fine.
reserved the right.
And Blue Cat is gonna sell the property to Pine Ridge, right?
Correct.
Which is, and it still hasn't been done yet because there has been an amendment to the purchase and the sale that we haven't seen yet because the purchase and sale
subject to all the approvals.
was stale. But then you said "we," implying that you are Blue Cat. That's all. So, right? Did I hear that right? And you're not, are you, do you represent Blue Cat?
I represent Pine Ridge, but there
It is owned by Blue Cat. I mean, it's
there's some affiliation there.
some affiliate.
Precisely what it is, I haven't gone down the rabbit hole on that. But we were,
Blue Cat sold it to, under agreement, under purchase and sale, to Pine Ridge.
will sell it.
So Mr. Dean sold it to himself?
No,
No?
Can,
Right.
Sorry, it's just so
So
complicated.
when,
It's not uncommon.
effectively, I guess you could say that,
Yes.
that Blue Cat,
It's not uncommon.
I know, it's not coming. I
Right.
just was clear that, so when Blue Cat sold the lots to Westport Lakes Drive, all those lots. that
Coastal
are-
Harvest.
The Coastal Harvest, yeah. Blue Cat maintained in the deed to Coastal Harvest, not, they had access to the road, which then will be conveyed to you.
Correct.
That's all I wanted to
to
know.
be conveyed.
Perfect.
Yes,
Perfect.
as long as their attorney doesn't mess up the deed.
Roger? You're trying to say something.
Okay, one more time?
yes, Stacy Pereira, 26 Westport Lakes Drive. I'm going to make it short and sweet. I believe what we were questioning was in that pink packet that was given, the deed.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So going to
Stop
that
copying
pink
me.
packet,
Stop copying.
what I've learned through all of this is wording. So in that pink packet, we had Secretary of Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We had a couple of corporations and printouts. I'm not sure if you guys remember that.
Yeah.
So since you're trying to figure this out, I want to say that this website is very informal. And I know Mr. Custin at one time had asked for proof. So I know you're volunteers, but if you enter Blue Cat into that, Shannon Corey, Bradford Dean, managers, along with Lisa. So the wording, we refer to as HOA and Blue Cat owning some of those properties, not Shannon Quarry. I just want you to be aware, like even in that packet, when Mr. Pereira had said about the in-law apartment being Coastal Harvest, and then they rephrased it and said it was Master Builders. If you go into this lovely website and hit Master Builders, you'll see who that was, which is one of the Coastal Harvests. Okay. So I just wanted to, I know this is the last public hearing, so I just wanted you guys to make aware that that site is pretty informational with some proof maybe of how everyone's in cahoots. Thank you.
Sorry. It's the last meeting. One last quick thing. I was in communication with Mr. Burris of the Planning Board throughout this whole 6 months or so. And I asked a couple of questions about the covenant that's being held in the 40B parcel. And more specifically, he responded to an email that said, and as far as that question was concerned, it is our position via counsel that the ZBA cannot waive. There was some talk through the attorney for the applicant that potentially the ZBA could waive the covenant hold on the 40B parcel. And I questioned the planning board as far as if you all as the ZBA could actually waive the current covenant that holds restriction of the 40B parcel to which the Pine Ridge Estates is scheduled to be placed on. And his response was, it is our position via counsel that the ZBA cannot waive the covenants. Blue Cat LLC managers are legally responsible for completing the project per the approved subdivision plans in fulfilling the planning board subdivision conditions of approval prior to the planning board allowing release of their lots involved in the Pine Ridge proposal. And it goes on to some other the purchase and sales agreement. The lots have not actually been transferred because I had questioned because the covenant actually restricts building and transfer. My question was because there was a purchase and sales, but technically it hadn't taken place yet. But if there is an intention for a transfer between Blue Cat and Pine Ridge, which are the same people, but regardless, I would assume that the covenant restricts that at any point until the covenant is lifted, to where they can't even legally transfer from Blue Cat to Pine Ridge LLC until the covenant is lifted. And the covenant, from my understanding, according to the planning board, will not be lifted until Westport Lakes Drive is completely finished with stormwater, the roadway, and everything, right to top coat asphalt. And I go, right to top coat asphalt? They said, we're not releasing the covenant until it's completely finished. So if there's any question, I think it would behoove the board to, or attorneys to get with the planning board to determine when and how the 40B or the Pine Ridge Estates parcel is going to be released to even do anything.
And they'll have a permit that they can't do anything with.
Can't do anything. And this includes the Mass Highway connection permit for Westport Lakes Drive. So there's a number of things that have to be determined before, or accomplished and finished before anything is able to be done on the Pine Ridge parcel, because it's still held on the covenant, protective covenant. And that's the only thing that they have left to ensure that Westport Lakes Drive is finished to completion. I'm not saying the house is all built out, but the roadway, the stormwater, and everything else has to be finished to completion before it's lifted. And only at which point then anything can be done on this property.
Attorney Puccia, we had discussed, so I was going to get to the point of closing the hearing and doing a straw man vote so that we could then move forward with writing a decision. If I do that, that means that we cannot get further information from the applicant.
Correct.
Is there still more information that you need to help develop? Because I know our attorney was going to update some things, the HOA, the whatever.
Yeah, I don't think it would be tragic for you to close the public hearing tonight. I do think it would benefit from another public hearing session, especially if, you know, things came out of this, there were late reports that came in from, not late, but recent submissions from Conservation Commission, Board of Health, you know, resulting from your working group meeting. I think it would benefit the process to have another hearing session in case things came up, so that we can confer with the applicant. Do you have a problem with this condition? Do you have a problem with that? How do you propose rewriting that? But we don't have to do that. You could close the hearing and ask me for a draft decision to deliberate on. That's fine. Or it, you know, like I say though, I'm big on keeping something open, because, you know, as you start to sharpen your pencil and get down to it, there tend to be additional questions that it benefits the process to be able to inquire.
Would it still be advisable to do a straw man vote so that we know at least which way we're going?
Yeah, I think that it would benefit the process if you at least got a consensus from the board members as to whether they agree that they're contemplating an approval with conditions versus a denial.
Right, okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Can I ask? Just a short while ago, you said you were confused about what's going on with Westport Lakes Drive. I mean, I think everybody is, it's not just you. And we discussed, well, maybe the planning board should write us a letter to say what is actually going on and when is this going to transpire? And that's something that you just said, hey, something could come from there.
I mean, we know part of what's gone on there. The opinion that was referenced, that was my opinion. You do not have jurisdiction to waive a covenant, you know, that is held by the town.
Right.
So we know certain things that are going on in that planning board process. We know that there was a site inspection and that type of thing. What I was getting more at is, I'm just too simple to figure out what party is who and doing what and why they're doing it. You know, it's beyond me. But what I do think you need the clarity on is, what kind of peace of mind do you have that, oh, we're approving something that we can be proud of. We end up with, we corrected a situation that, however it ended up that way, we solved this roadway issue. We permitted a project that we're proud of, that we think protects the health and safety of the residents and meets the town's needs. You know, things like that, I think it benefits from further information to try to figure out what exactly is the status, what was contemplated, are there further site visits, is there additional work contemplated, what's going on with the bond. But again, it's not crucial. You've certainly received enough information that, you know, you could close the public hearing tonight.
Would it be
I'd
appropriate?
like to suggest that we follow up on Ray's suggestion to get a current status in writing from the planning board
Appropriate
so
to
we
have
know where
Coastal
they are.
Harvest here?
Secondly,
Who owns the road?
we have a consultant here, and the large part of the beginning of this meeting, there was a lot of discussion along with the board, the health issues and so forth, but we haven't heard anything from
He was
him.
involved in all of this.
Right,
No
we weren't
No.
involved. You're talking about the working sessions.
Right,
Yes.
yes.
And I'm just,
We still think
is
it's a
there
secret
anything,
Santa meeting, you know?
is there anything at all?
Well, I
hearing from-
I went over all the things that we had
Yeah.
Yes,
discussed.
I understand
And-
that. I'm just asking if there's anything that our consultant should be telling us to advise us. That's all.
You have any,
Yes, through Mr. Chairman, Brian Dunn with MBL Land Development and Permitting. A few things. I think the Board of Health has been very, very clear in vocal and in writing in regards to their opposition to the waiver of the local bylaw. I think that that's been very, very clear. When we have language that says that a septic system should follow the testing and requirements of the DEP, it's really talking about single-family home septic systems, and not a system that's, 100 by, 85 or 110 feet wide. So when the dosing requirements first came in to play back in 2008, myself and my office were one of the first engineers of record to do a dosing required system for over 2,000 gallons a day from multiple housing. And at that time, it was permitted by the DEP. And 2 tests and a perk test in a system that large is not appropriate. It probably needs at least 5 holes, a minimum of 5, and for a system that large. So I know that you're seeing, in the language in the permit is saying follow the DEP regulation on Title V, but I think it would behoove this board to say that additional testing is required, because we know that Christian Farland in his office, and John can correct me if I'm wrong, did a test out there this past February, and that was a failed system, a failed test. However, that was not provided on the plan, but it was on record at the Board of Health that it did fail in that area of one of the systems. So I know that you keep on saying they're going to do testing in July or August of this year, which is fine. However, right now, there's really only the record information on the plans that are showing that a test bit of 8 minutes an inch are provided. Also, if you might remember, the original set of plans showed a septic system that was for 56 units, and not the number of units that we have provided on the updated plans. So there was some errors on the plans in regards to the septic system design early on, and our office identified that in writing many times through this process. So I would think that if you're going to put language in as an approval of following the DEP's rules and regulations, you should also determine the amount of test bits that are required for the field and the reserve area. However, if you don't, they're going to do 2 tests and a perk, and that's going to be it. But the system is a lot larger than someone's single-family home lot. Also, in regards to stormwater, they are going back to trying to infiltrate some of the roof runoff that we identified as an issue in the first iteration of the plans. So the language is saying that they're going to design the stormwater system to the extent practical, which that language is for a redevelopment, not a new development. So the language should be revised to say they are going to conform with the stormwater rules and regulations 1 through 10, file a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission, and seek approval of that stormwater system in regards to all 10 standards, not to the extent practical. Because what will end up happening is the engineers will say, oh, I did my best over here, but this is the best I can do, but I don't meet the standard. So we need to say,
You have to
meet the standard.
I didn't like that language.
And the other thing is, we've got 36 units going in here with 36 wells. And the chairman also discussed Cape Cod as an issue of, sandy soils, and they need those setbacks, because Cape Cod is what we call a sole source aquifer. And because of the fast perk rates of the sand. So the effluent will seep the groundwater very, very fast. So we need to make sure that there is that protection of the waters of the Commonwealth, which is really the wetlands, the floodplains, and things like that, and also the groundwater aquifer that's here in the town. So conforming to those setbacks that are in the local regulations, they're there for a reason to protect those resource areas. So, but I think that the Board of Health has been very, very clear about their opposition to those waivers.
Well, first of all, after they get done with this, they're gonna have to go back to the Board of Health for approval. They're gonna have to go back to Concom. Now, the only thing that is issue are the local regulations, and we've had meetings, and you were involved in those meetings.
Yep.
And the Board of Health and Concom both went back and had their own meetings with their own group
Yep.
and provided us with an input on what they believe is reasonable for this project. So, I mean, the Board of Health and the Concom have given us what they believe should go in as conditions for approval.
Yeah. You know, Roger, I had a question about that though too. The presentation by the rep tonight, I might have misunderstood it. It seemed somewhat inconsistent with the Board of Health letter, because I thought I heard she was urging strict compliance,
Well,
the more restrictive.
this was though
look.
with a waiver that wasn't in the
Okay,
original booklet.
okay,
100-foot versus 50-foot was not an original waiver, it just came out recently.
yeah, so that.
And that's, and
That was
and
not
that is
really-
one now that,
Yeah.
We'd like to get their opinion, a written opinion probably
Yeah,
from the board.
right, that was not addressed in the letter. Good, I'm glad. That's sort of my impression of it. And then the only other thing I'd point out, and I would stand corrected by the peer reviewer really, if necessary, but it seems that the recommendations, and I'm not going against the recommendations, I'm just trying to understand it. It seemed to me that the recommendations that you got from Board of Health and Concom were relaxed standards under the local regulations.
they were,
That,
they allowed for some relaxation.
so I just wanted to point that out, so that
Yes.
the board understood what they were doing. It's great that the applicant responded to those tonight, but the board needs to know, oh, we aren't requiring strict letter of the law on the local regulations, and here's what we're allowing.
Yes, but that's, but we haven't gotten to the point of actually identifying the conditions, if we were to grant this.
Yeah,
We haven't actually, we have recommendations from the Board of Health. We have recommendations from Concom. We have recommendations from our consultant. And those will have to be all taken into consideration when we write, if we were to grant, we would then have to decide
Yeah.
what conditions we are actually going to impose.
right, but when I go to write that permit for you or work off of the applicant's draft, all I do is I go by the comments that you
And
can
then,
see.
and then it's gonna come in front of us, and then we're gonna,
Okay. All right,
we're either gonna, tweak it, or you're gonna give us a draft.
okay, good.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could just, two comments on what Mr. Dunn said. On the test numbers, the number of tests within the proposed soil absorption system, we're not saying to limit the number of tests. The nuance is, we were fine with the proposed conditions that were in the June 24th letter. The reason we added pursuant to Title V. Title V does give the Board of Health, as the permit granting authority, the right to ask for more tests for larger systems. They do. And there's actually no limit under Title V. The nuance that I'm introducing is, if this condition is in the permit, then this is the ZBA giving the Board of Health the power under this condition, and not the power under the permit granting authority as a state agency. And it could potentially eliminate our ability to seek an appeal if we thought the Board of Health was being unreasonable in the number of tests that they required. So generally, for a size of that, for a septic system of that size, you do 3 tests, minimum. You mentioned 5.
I want to correct him, no. The DEP has been very forthright on this. 1 in the middle, 2 in each corner, to identify the true limits of the stratum of the soil.
That's 3.
No, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
2 in each corner?
1 in each corner.
One in each corner of
one in the
the
middle.
site.
Okay?
You got a round corner.
Yeah.
All right, well,
So 5 for a field. So that means 5 for the regular fields and 5 for the reserve area.
and if that's the standard, we're fine with that, if that's the
That's
DEP
the
standard.
Standard.
Well, that's what the DEP did to me on multiple projects.
Okay.
Well, and again, I think the only thing we were trying to ensure is that we were referencing their rights as the state permitting agency, because we have to go before them, but the concern is if it just reads, the number of tests shall be established by the Board of Health, I mean, anything, sitting in its capacity as the state permit granting authority under Title V. And then that would at least give us some assurance that if, God forbid, we thought they were being unreasonable, that we would have appellate rights to the DEP. I mean, frankly, we'd probably have appellate rights to the HAC anyway. But I think the point here was we wanted, that was the only point, was we wanted some reference to the state requirements, since that's what we're getting at. But the rest of this was perfectly fine. As far as the maximum extent practicable, there was language in there in that paragraph that said, nothing herein shall be deemed to waive requirements of state law. That condition is for this board. That condition is before we even get to the CONCOM. And if you remember, the CONCOM said, look, before we get this, like, you're going to have to do some infiltration before we even get it. So that's a condition that we've offered for this board's adjudication. But nothing that we do is going to waive the state infiltration requirement. So we're not altering the state requirement to somehow say we're only going to do it to the maximum extent practicable. It again preserves our right to have the DEP as the adjudicatory agency if for some reason there was a dispute. And that's how it normally goes. If there's a dispute at the CONCOM, you go for a superseding order. And that's when it would be decided. So, you know, it would likely get worked out before that because we know what the soils are, we know what we're trying to accomplish. But again, it's just, that's why that word was chosen. That's for the board's benefit. We're not altering state law. So I wanted to be clear on that. The last point, going back to the roadway, rather than, you know, this board is wearing the planning board's hat. I haven't seen any opinion that was written. My original February 14th letter gave our opinion on the covenants. This board's charge is set conditions for what you want the road to look like from 177 to the access to the site. That's within your authority as a condition of that permit. Whatever happens outside of that, you know, we can litigate whether this board has the authority. You know, I think this board does have the authority as the planning board for anything that affects this property. Private covenants, if we gave the town an easement, the decision out of the Newton zoning board, there was a case where there was a private contract. I don't believe that planning board covenants fall within that, but it's irrelevant. I think you want to know what this is going to look like at the end of the project, and we've offered to have a discussion about conditions, and this board can impose conditions. What do you want it to look like from 177 into the site? Before the last occupancy permit or through surety, you know, that can be a discussion. We've offered that from the beginning, and that's appropriate. This board wants to know, all right, how are you accessing it? What's it going to look like? And then how that's worked out monetarily is between us and Coastal Harvest, who's a third party. You know, if we have to sue them to, you know, get them to make it a certain way to satisfy the condition, that's between us and them. But you're able to set, you want it to look a certain way during different phases. You want to make sure that covenants aren't released until the brush is cut, damage is repaired. You know, we'd like to, and going to town council's point, if this board is you know, trying to, it's a difficult position under 40B. You're being asked to waive local requirements. Clearly, that's going to cause controversy, but you're essentially acting as a state permitting agency addressing a critical shortage in housing in the Commonwealth. And this law has been a tool that has developed a lot of good housing projects. We think this is one of them. And if the board is just struggling with trying to formulate those conditions and work with the applicant, every board does it differently as far as how they close the hearing. No matter what you do, if you are inclined to try to move forward and you know, take a straw vote to grant the permit with conditions, however we decide to move forward, I just want the applicant to be able to give the board feedback. And then the chair has done a great job of keeping things, you know, focused and moving forward. And, you know, that could be the chair's charge to say, hey, hold on, we already heard testimony on that. You know, it's an open hearing, but there's no right to provide testimony. It's the chair could kick, you know, the chair could have us not give any testimony, but leaving it in the chair's discretion to maybe have a more narrow discussion about conditions. It's That's an option. So
Well-
however it's done, I just
Let me
would
ask-
want,
That's the reason why I'm asking, when I had talked to Attorney Pucci beforehand, is doing a straw man vote if we, and then again, it's a majority vote, so it's 3 out of the 5. It at least gives us should we be writing, should I have Attorney Pucci start writing a denial letter, or should he start writing an approval letter? And if it's an approval letter, then we can start working on whatever conditions we impose to make sure that this project moves forward.
right, and you could,
And in the second part, if the majority decided that they're inclined to grant with conditions, then obviously there would be, we would have it would certainly be more effort to actually flesh out those conditions. Well, a lot of them we've already sort of discussed, but some of them are still a little squishy. And certainly, the whole board hasn't really signed up to any of those yet. So that's where I'm
Yeah,
heading,
I
is that I would do a straw man vote just to sort of get this moving.
But don't we need another open, like, when do we all discuss?
Well,
That's the thing, is that.
It has to be an open hearing,
yes,
right?
well.
No, well, here's the thing. So,
But if I closed it, it would be just like we did any other hearing. We would then discuss, make our conditions, whatever, so.
Right, but then we're not gonna
But if
get
I closed it, then we couldn't get information from
Right.
from
if you
anybody.
close the
We don't
hearing-
gotta do that tonight.
I don't plan on doing that tonight.
If you close, yeah,
Okay, just checking.
close
I
it
need more
tonight,
food
then
then.
you would conduct deliberations in the 40 days, and that's when you'd have your
Yeah.
discussion. I think your
Are we running into a time problem? We are, aren't we?
Mr. Chairman, point of order. My understanding is if it was to be closed, and during your deliberation, if you had questions of the applicant,
No,
I've done it
Sorry.
other times. but
you're not doing it in this town.
it all depends, but I mean, my suggestion, if that's the way town council advises the board, that once it's closed, there's no feedback, depending if the board is willing to even consider granting a permit with conditions, then the applicant, with, the chair leading a limited discussion to try to make sure we're moving forward and not revisiting, duplicative issues, I would certainly want the ability to give feedback. Therefore, it would be keep the hearing open with the chair, using his discretion to have a narrow discussion.
Yeah, I would think that if you reach a consensus tonight, that you don't have a lengthy discussion, but just kind of a consensus, I think what I would recommend you do is, if, with the applicant's consent, you continue the public hearing, they keep the deadline open to a date certain. We prepare, the second draft of the permit based on the draft that council has provided.
Yep.
I get that to you in advance of your next hearing. And, your next hearing is basically, the agenda for that hearing is to discuss the permit.
The
And
decision.
then you can be talking about, well, what does this condition mean? I want something more
Right.
stringent, or,
Yes.
and then that way too, you have the ability to really start deliberations on an actual decision. You have the ability to get feedback and ask questions of
Right.
the applicant if you want. You can hear from the peer review or other town departments. And then you still would have your 40 days, if you go ahead and vote it, to then deliberate on a final decision.
Okay. What is our date?
Right now, the date to close is Friday.
Okay.
That's the deadline.
I mean,
That's why you did 2 extra days, because if else
Right.
you would have the.
but I mean, it all comes down to whether the board is inclined to have a productive discussion about conditions and understanding the tough charge under the law, willing to, grant the permit with subject to a discussion about conditions at the next hearing. I mean, if the board's inclination is that it's just not interested in this project moving forward, then we know that tonight, and we could save everybody the time. But certainly, there's no reason to put time pressure on the board if you're trying to work through difficult, detailed issues, and have town council, write a decision that you can all review independently in advance of the next hearing. We could review it as well, and be prepared to have a discussion about specifics.
Okay.
Can I ask?
So, before you ask, let me, see, we got two paths here. So, there's two potential outcomes of a straw man vote. It's either deny or grant, right? Now, see, the problem is Friday is our deadline currently. If we decide to deny, then why would we? But again, it's only a straw man. So if we decided to deny, then I would have to close the hearing because I don't have time to
May I offer?
do anything else.
May I offer option C?
Yes.
It being a straw man vote and straw woman vote, it's not definitive, okay? So the question would be to, if the vote is not in favor of a grant with, reasonable conditions consistent with the collaborative discussion we've had, then at that point, we'd say, okay, is there any chance of potentially changing the mind of the person on one particular condition that is of heightened concern? In which case, we could have a brief discussion now to see whether or not there's a condition that is of particular concern that might change that person's mind, in which case it may be worth extending Friday's decision. If it's irrevocable, that nobody's going to change their mind, there's no way the project works, then I would ask the chair to have a formal vote,
I would just close the hearing, they go vote.
make the vote, and charge town council with rendering, a decision within.
Yeah, I would just see, I wouldn't call it a vote. I wouldn't take a vote. I would just I would seek consensus, see if there's consensus amongst the board. That should satisfy the applicant. Somebody, this board, everybody's very upfront. If they are a hard no, they can say it.
Right, okay.
I have a question before I can actually
Go ahead.
do a vote. So, what I was trying to ask you before, and actually, given what applicant's counsel has said, we're actually acting as a planning board. So, right?
With regard to certain issues, not with regard to the covenant.
What about, so we can't get Coastal Harvest in here to discuss the issues regarding the road?
I don't think the applicant's going, you definitely could. I don't think the applicant's going to agree to that.
I don't,
So,
I don't see how, what I would say is, you can define the standard.
Anymore.
If you want to see 177 to Gulfview look a certain way, it doesn't matter what Coastal Harvest says. If the project's going to go forward, it's our problem. We have to deal with
You're
it.
going to have to pay for it.
So we have to litigate it, we got to compel them to do it. If that's, and we offered from the beginning that it needs to look a certain way, and we have no intent of, selling the development and the units with an ugly road into the development. So, however it gets done, you could condition this project on those types of issues.
What do you mean when you offered it from the beginning? You mean tonight, but certainly not at the beginning of this?
No, in his first letter.
No, my first letter, February 14th, 2025, conditions to the issuance of the last occupancy permit that relate to, a reasonable discussion about appropriate conditions to ensure that the portion of Westport Lakes Road from 177 to Gulfview Lane is repaired and finished following completion of construction work.
and that's the thing, Cynthia, when you talk about being in the shoes of the planning board, the zoning board wants to be able to coordinate a little bit, to know what the planning board's thinking is. In other words, what is their viewpoint of the status of that roadway? What does need to be done? Is there drainage that isn't complete, or what is that process? And then you can order that, you can have that, but you wouldn't want to have inconsistent conditions in your permit with what planning board is trying to achieve
Right.
for that roadway.
Right, so we really need more information from the planning board, what they're
Yeah.
trying to achieve,
I would,
as Ray said so eloquently.
if I could, Mr. Chairman, that's when I got involved initially. The planning board wrote a letter to Blue Cat, and we said, look, this is 40B, everything comes through the zoning board. I wrote to the zoning board, and the planning board said what they wanted done. They went back, and I believe reports were issued, and there's been a lot that was exchanged since then. So,
Yeah, there were initial reports, but then there has been further activities.
Yeah, and I suppose now that we're getting there, the board could charge, town council's charged with drafting the decision. He represents, the plan, I think, some towns, it's two different attorneys. Do you represent the planning board as well?
No.
I don't know.
No.
Depends on what I'm asked to do.
Right, but what I was getting at, I mean, in going through this exercise, we can look at what's there.
Yeah.
Okay, we can look at what's there and put it in the conditions so that it's consistent, and then we'll look at it as well as the applicant and say, yep, that makes sense, we can do that, or we'll appear at the next hearing and say, hey, we got a problem with this for the following reasons.
Okay, I'm going to do a straw man, but before I do that, I'm going to read you what it really means.
Yes.
And this is not only for the board, this is for all you out there, because this really is important for you to understand what it is when we grant or what it is when we deny. So this is from the state requirements for 40B. So anyway, the ZBA must issue a decision on a comprehensive permit within 40 days of a public hearing. When we close the hearing, we have 40 days to do this. The hearing must be approved by a simple majority, so it's not a supermajority like some of the other things that we do. Okay, Chapter 40B authorizes the ZBA to approve with conditions or deny a comprehensive permit application. Now, there are specific reasons why we can deny. Some of them have to do with safe harbor, which we are not. A safe harbor is a town that meets the minimum requirement from the state for affordable housing, which I think is like 10% or something.
10%.
And Westport is something like 2.5. It's a small number. So we do not fall under, if we were in the safe harbor, then we could just say, no, we don't want it. And pretty much, because we've already met our affordable housing requirement. We're not in that condition, so that doesn't apply to us. However, the HAC generally does not support denials if the ZBA could have granted the comprehensive permit with reasonable conditions to protect the health, safety, open space, site, and building concerns. Accordingly, the ZBA should review denial of a comprehensive permit as a last resort. Measure must be taken when there is no practical way to approve the project with conditions. It is in the best interest of the community and the developer are served when the ZBA issues a decision agreeable to both. Now, so let me tell you what happens if we approve and we don't approve. If we approve this petition with all the conditions that we want to impose on it, they are then required to abide by all of those conditions. And those conditions go beyond the state requirements. They have to abide by the state requirements regardless. There's no discussion about that. Now, suppose we were to deny. If we were to deny and we did not have sufficient reason, they go to court, and if they win the court case, then they get to develop it however they see fit, as long as they meet the state requirements. So that's the reason why they say it really is best for the town to agree as long as you can have conditions that mitigate the concerns that you have. Otherwise, you're going to go to court, and if the court feels that there was not just cause, then they would then throw out our decision, and the developer would be able to develop however he sees fit.
Hey,
So-
Roger, you keep saying court, but.
Well, it's HAC, there's a couple,
Housing committee, correct?
I'll say appeal.
right.
There is a difference.
It's not really a court, but it's still the next higher
Still-
authority.
And
That's what the
They can
HAC.
still
give
steamroll
everything.
over us.
So, but they would then, again, so, and again, we have the authority, the ability to then provide whatever conditions into this, even if they don't like them, we can provide conditions, or we can deny waivers that we do not feel are appropriate. They can then appeal the waiver, but in appealing the waiver, they only get to appeal the waiver, not the decision. Isn't that correct, Attorney Pucci?
Somewhat. What happens is, though, if, in the event of an appeal, they tend to appeal a lot more than the condition at issue. They
Okay.
We can appeal the conditions as well.
they will appeal pretty much,
Everything.
yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, you want, but you make a very good point. So what you want to do is, you want to keep that in mind. If you're doing an approval with conditions and also acting on waivers, you also want to be on very strong grounds on those.
Right.
Because they have an equally biased approach in favor of developing housing.
Yes.
So they will overturn it if they think that it wasn't a reasonable thing based on a compelling local concern.
Right, and again, it's, we only can reject something within our boundaries. Who the developer is has already been decided by Mass Housing. I mean, there are some things that are not reason for us.
You've made progress on that with.
You know, there were some aspects of this that if we were to deny for that reason, it would.
You've made progress on that though, because
Yes.
you are getting to the bottom of the
So,
roadway and you.
all I want to get is, let's all understand what's at stake here, is denying it can actually be counterproductive. According to everything I've read, you really want to grant, as long as you can grant with enough conditions that mitigate any concerns that all the board members have. And that's something that,
And the process really is a give and take. So sometimes the developer, you know, if they sense that you are going to grant an approval with conditions, you're being reasonable, they'll bend a little bit. But they will agree to things that otherwise, maybe they might have appealed
Right.
depending on the rest of the decision.
Right.
So it encourages a collaborative process. And just one last thing about your denial, you make a very good point, because unlike a court case where if a court case, say the court, not HAC, if they overturn, say, a special permit decision, they'll send it back to you and they'll say, reconsider this consistent with my opinion. But they won't tell you to grant a permit subject to certain conditions. They'll just say, grant the permit consistent with the decision. So then you impose conditions. What HAC does, if they overturn a denial, they will list, it will consist of one page of conditions about they apply for a building permit, you grant it on an expedited basis, this is subject to state law and requirements. Grant it within 30 days or this will serve as the permit. So they don't give you any more leeway, they don't remand it to you, they just give you 30 days to do exactly what they said to do, which is a bare bones permit with conditions that will be very unsatisfactory to the town. So you want to have that balance, you want to recognize that balance and try to maintain local control over your ability to properly condition this project.
okay.
And so-
Chairman, before we get to the point of a straw vote or whatever, I just want a clarification on something. Ray made a suggestion earlier. I expressed agreement with it regarding getting something from the planning board as to the present status of this entire situation with them. And we didn't discuss it or agree to it. I just want to know if there's any objection to doing that. I would make a motion and do it, but if it's agreed that we all feel that we should get that, then I'll just.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's,
Okay.
I think that's right now an important consideration, and it's just, I think it's just an order of business, not a, I don't think
The
it's.
straw vote has nothing to do with that. Just-
Well, it does, because if we deny, then
Then we don't have to
you
worry.
don't have to do anything.
Mr. Chairman,
You know, and what would happen then, if we were to say, yeah, we're kind of leaning to grant it, then we would now have I assume you're going to allow an extension, so that then we could work on Attorney Pucci writing up a draft based on yours with the conditions, and then we can then all sit around and go through all those to see if we want to either make those conditions more strict or deny waivers. You know, Attorney Pucci is going to come up with a draft for us to then review and edit as we see fit.
I have a question. So, two actually, but, so say that we approved it with strict conditions, then can the applicant appeal those conditions?
Yes.
Yes.
So even though we might feel that we're doing something good for the town and that we're able to impose some stringent conditions, They are sitting there going, okay, yeah, okay, okay. Approve it, then after we've approved it, then they can go back and they can appeal those conditions.
Correct. Developer's right of appeal is to the Housing Appeals Committee, and they can appeal either a denial or they can appeal an approval with conditions.
Okay.
And your question is important, because that goes to the point about how you want to be careful about your conditions. You want them to be based on compelling local concerns. Because in the event of appeal, HAC is equally stringent in scrutinizing conditions of approval as they are of a denial. So it's high stakes, so you do want to reach that balance of
So we need to
having
back up.
And that's the reason why.
conditions based on compelling local concerns.
Yes.
And that's the reason why in their booklet, the state says you really should try as much as possible to have, your conditions are agreeable to, to both the board and the applicant. Now, in some cases, they may not be, and that's
And so
perfectly
my,
fine, but.
can I answer my second question is, what if we could not see clear to vote for something, for a waiver, say, of section 7? Would that mean that we would be denying this, or can?
No,
No.
you would not, it would still be a approval with conditions, but you deny that particular waiver.
Right.
Or there might be a vote, you might be in the minority on that. Sometimes boards will vote the waivers separately than the overall decision. And I've seen, you don't like this, I don't like it. I've seen approvals that the board approved the permit, and then there was a minority vote on a couple of the waivers.
Yeah.
But it still ends up being an approval with conditions,
Right.
and it gets, depending on what the vote was on the waiver, say it's a unanimous vote to grant the permit with conditions, but it's a 3-2 vote of a 5-member board to approve a waiver. It's still the approval with conditions, and that waiver will be deemed granted. So
And that waiver will what?
will be deemed granted if 3-2 voted to grant it, but 2 didn't want to grant it. I tend to prefer a situation where the board votes the whole decision with the waivers after full discussion, and really try to reach a consensus, at least a majority vote of, we all agree of what we're approving and what waivers we're granting and what we're not granting. Have that as part of one vote, as opposed to having these little votes, that are voted a different way on the waivers, because that can lead to an appeal too. So hopefully that explains, see what I'm saying?
Yes, thank
So
you.
whatever vote we have here in the straw vote, doesn't matter what we do with condition?
I don't love the term straw vote.
I know, I was going to echo that, and I think canvassing the board for the opinions.
Could we go around the board and get your thoughts about if you're, inclined to be interested in approval? with
Right,
conditions?
right,
I'll
right.
tell you right now, I've read through everything right from the beginning. There's 72 waivers in the original book. And I don't have any problem with any of the waivers with the exception of what's going on with conservation and what's going on with the Board of Health. And in my opinion, I think that we have a good reason to say, well, we're not gonna allow this because, number one, we don't even know where that septic system is on a plan. It's on a tentative plan. And we don't have a perk test. We wouldn't approve anything that came in front of us if it didn't have any of those things already.
But that's a waiver that we can, that's a condition or a waiver that you can
I'm
reject.
just saying, to me, it doesn't look that way.
Well, everybody gets a vote.
Yep, an opinion.
So, let's go for, Jerry, are you generally, is that okay, or just, what's your general theory on granting with conditions or outright denying?
Well, I would not go for a denial.
Can you speak up? I'm sorry.
Experience with that. We just, I would say approval with waivers.
Okay? Right.
Yeah, I'm not gonna outright deny it either, but I just think that this issue with the,
So, are you saying grant with with conditions and, I mean, if you're not,
I say deny.
you're saying deny?
Yep.
Okay. I'm saying grant with conditions.
I really don't feel good about this at all. I feel like the state has a gun to our head, and we don't have good information on two very key points, and I agree with Ray on that. I would not give them a waiver for either the perk test or the Section 7. However, because we have a gun to our head, and because they can say, all right, well, we won't do anything, and we won't put article, and they've already threatened to do this, you know, we won't abide by the D-night request of the town. We'll just put in a regular septic if we don't have our way. We really are between a rock and a hard place on this. So, and you mentioned, Attorney Pucci, you know, is this a decision that we can feel good about, that we can feel proud that we made, and that we did something good for the town? I say no, I don't. But, you know, what else are we going to do? But I would not grant those waivers. But because we are between a rock and a hard place, I would be willing to think about, with major conditions, approving it.
Okay.
Right. I think there's major safety concerns in this project, which I think is one very few things we could deny it on. However, with that said, I think we have a better chance of controlling what this is going to be if we grant the permit with conditions that will address the safety concerns, because if it goes to the state, they'll just let them do whatever they want. And this is, I mean, it's, as I think Constance says, it pretty much sucks, but I think at least let's try to get as much control of it as we can.
Yeah. If they don't then go and appeal.
But then we just gotta, then Attorney Pucci has to make sure that all our conditions are well supported.
Right.
And I think they would give deference if they were well supported. You would hope.
Okay, so,
That was very, very helpful, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just get a clarification. I'm a little unclear on Mr. Elias's position, because I thought I heard a few things. I don't know if you wouldn't mind kind of elaborating a bit, because originally you said you were concerned about the perk tests and the setback.
The perk test and where the system's going to be set.
Right. But aside from that issue,
I don't have any other ones. I don't have anything else.
so, you know, generally, you'd be okay if we could get you some comfort with conditions or a denial of the waiver if that's what you decide.
I kind of agree with Constance. If you're saying that you're going to abide by the local bylaws that are trying to protect Westport in an environmental way, yeah, I would say yes.
Okay. That's very helpful. You know, I think with that, it would certainly make sense to keep the hearing open and have town council try to craft conditions. What I would suggest is, you know, the waiver's binary. You either get the waiver or you don't. But what I would suggest is that the board charge town council with proposing conditions that would be an alternative to the waiver, understanding you still get to vote on it, to see whether or not we can, at the next hearing, maybe discuss those hot-button issues to see if, okay, you know, we can live with this conditioned a certain way with a waiver on those issues, but with the following, similar to what the Board of Health suggested, and obviously there's a lot more to that than just, you know, the proposed condition, but if we have a robust discussion about whether or not that's something we can discuss at the next hearing.
okay, speaking of which, when can we do the next?
Could I ask something else before we close this? On the conditions tonight, I didn't hear us discuss at all. They may be buried in there. I didn't hear us discuss what a member of the public presented, and that was that the project that they're going through to get to this, had a number of outstanding issues that never got addressed, various state agencies and so forth. And I don't know why we would just close our eyes to that. I just think that one of them had to do, I think, with animals and stuff like that. And so I would think the condition ought to be that they follow through with seeing to it that those pieces are resolved. I don't know the answer to that.
I remember this from like the first or second meeting.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it was repeated tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, I would,
So can we propose a continuation?
Roger, when does the board like to have a draft before the meeting by, so that you have enough time to look at it?
10 days, 2 weeks?
I was gonna say the Monday before the meeting, but
What's that?
I was just gonna say the Monday before the meeting would be fine with me.
Week before?
Okay?
Week before.
Week before the meeting?
Week before the meeting.
So if the meeting's on a Wednesday, you want it the Wednesday before?
Yeah.
All right.
This is
Well,
going to be a long,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, and again, every board does it differently, and town council, every town council does it differently. I think it would be helpful if we had a chance to see maybe an initial draft to give some feedback to town council before you finalize.
No, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the board, I'm fine, conferring with the applicant and the peer reviewer as I put this draft together
Okay.
for you.
That's fine.
Because there's not going to be any deal made by me, it's going to
Right.
come back
It's
before
gonna
you.
come
So,
back to
yeah,
us for-
I don't have a problem with that.
okay.
If you want the draft a week before your hearing, just please keep that in mind, that
We needed a week.
We need a week.
I don't like to make a promise that I can't
Yeah,
keep, so
yeah.
let's just make sure we schedule this so that I have enough time built in to get all that done.
Well, if we do that, then you're going to have to ask for an extension.
And we're fine with that.
So we gotta pick a date.
And
You should pick a date first, right?
The 30th?
30th or the 20th? 23rd or the 30th, one of those?
Probably the 30th.
30th.
So that gives,
How long?
That gives council
Attorney Mnuchin,
and-
Did you say the 30th?
How much time are you going to take to?
I'm going to take as much time as you give me. No, I mean, seriously, because if you tell me you want it a week before, you'll get it a week before, but, so.
I think the 30th is good if you get,
Yeah.
I don't want a half a job either. I mean,
I mean-
I don't want it tomorrow, and next week probably is too early, so
I think the meeting on the 30th
give this whole process a month.
gives him 3 weeks to,
If you-
Work with
If
the-
you're looking at the 30th,
Yeah.
that definitely works for me.
I think that's fine.
Okay with you?
That's fine, and there's a holiday week,
Yeah.
or, the 4th of July, and, yeah.
Is this gonna be at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, Mr. Chairman?
What are we doing?
Excuse me?
Is this gonna be at 6:30 or 7 o'clock?
We only did 7 because the attorney couldn't make it at 6:30. Is 6:30 going to be okay for the 30th?
and are we gonna promise it's 65 degrees out?
July 30th, we're talking, July 30th?
6:30.
6:30.
6:30 on the 30th works.
Okay, so you're going to have to write a,
I have my computer open this time. Can I do it via email to the chair and sign it? Oh, you have a form? Even better.
you'll be here.
So I suppose we extend the deadline to close the hearing to August 1st, 2 days after?
That would only give,
No, at that point, we're going to have, once we make a decision, we have 40 days to,
File with the town clerk.
And that'll be the only thing we have on that agenda then.
yeah. And all the board members, we have it. Is that?
Is it a closed meeting?
No, we can't have a closed.
After 4 days.
No, it'll still be an open meeting, but it will be a closed hearing.
August 1st will be.
Like we normally.
Yeah, where you can't take,
Closed meeting, don't take any more information.
where you
Just-
take no more.
Jerry, you're all set with the 30th?
Yeah?
Okay. Let me make sure I am. Sure I am.
You want a motion?
30, my goodness.
In the meantime, we can get something from the planning board.
Yeah.
My suggestion, if I may, would be that town council review whatever the planning board has as the status, and that be kind of included perhaps as part of the proposed conditions. And then we can discuss whether or not it make, that's the open discussion we can have.
You're okay with the 30th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tanya?
I thought we needed this
we have-
indication.
Mr. Chair, just have a quick question. There was reference to a waiver request of the setback. I don't believe the Board of Health has seen that. I was wondering if...
We haven't seen, this is the first time we've seen it either,
Oh,
so we'll pass that along.
okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, we do need a recommendation on that.
Yes.
It wasn't addressed. Yeah.
Got a copy of the amended purchase and sale.
You want a motion to continue?
He has to,
You
You want to wait?
he has to ask for it first.
I think
Got it right
that's what
here, I
he's
just have
doing.
to sign it. Mr. Chairman, the applicant would request that the board continue the hearing to July 30th, and the applicant has granted an extension of the deadline to close the hearing on its 40B application to August 1st, if the chair would consider that.
At 6:30 PM, right? 6:30.
6:30.
All right, I'll make a motion that this hearing be continued to Wednesday, July 30th, 6:30 PM in this room.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, no. It's granted. So we'll see you on the 30th. Hopefully then we can have a decision that we can bang out and
Still some work to do.